The train died 3 miles outside Black Hollow, and Evelyn Mercer knew she was going to die with it. Not immediately, not cleanly, but slowly. The way women died on the frontier when they had no money, no protection, and no future. The engine had been coughing black smoke for hours, wheezing like a sick animal, and when it finally shuddered to a stop in the middle of nowhere, the conductor didn't even bother lying about it. "End of the line," he said, not looking at her. "Everyone off." Evelyn sat frozen in the third-class car, staring at her reflection in the filthy window. 26 years old. Decent-looking once, before the hunger and the shame carved hollows under her cheekbones. Her dress was clean but cheap, mended in 3 places. Her hands were raw from scrubbing floors in boarding houses across 4 states, running from a debt that followed her like a shadow. The Philadelphia mine collapse had killed her father and destroyed everything else. The investors blamed the workers. The workers blamed each other. And when the smoke cleared, the Mercer family owed $17,000 to men who collected debts with brass knuckles and kerosene. Evelyn had run. She'd changed her name twice, worked herself sick in factory towns, and kept moving west where the law got thinner and people asked fewer questions. But the debt collectors were patient. They'd found her in Chicago, found her in Omaha, and they'd find her in Black Hollow too, unless she disappeared so completely that even ghosts couldn't track her. The other passengers pushed past her, hauling trunks and children toward the frozen wasteland outside. Evelyn grabbed her battered suitcase. Everything she owned fit inside one bag now, and stepped down onto ground so cold it hurt to breathe. Black Hollow wasn't a town. It was a wound cut into the wilderness. 43 buildings, most of them crooked. A single muddy street lined with saloons, a trading post, a marshal's office that looked abandoned, and a hotel with broken windows. The mountains rose behind it like black teeth, jagged and merciless. Snow fell in thin, mean sheets, and the wind carried the smell of wood smoke, horse manure, and something else Evelyn couldn't name, something rotten beneath the ice. The other passengers scattered quickly, met by family or hired wagons. Evelyn stood alone on the platform, clutching her suitcase, trying not to look as terrified as she felt. A man in a fur coat approached her, 50s maybe, belly pushing against his buttons, eyes like a snake tasting the air. "You got people here, miss?" Evelyn's throat tightened. "I'm meeting someone." "Uh-huh," he smiled, showing tobacco-stained teeth. "You're lying. Women don't come here alone unless they're running or desperate, and you look like both. Leave me alone. I'm trying to help." He stepped closer. She could smell whiskey on his breath. Black Hollow eats women like you. No husband, no protection. Hell, you won't last a week. But I run a business, clean place, 3 meals a day. You work for me, I'll keep you safe. Evelyn knew exactly what kind of business he meant. She'd seen those places in every frontier town, the cribs behind the saloons where women went when they ran out of choices. "No thank you." His smile vanished. "You think you're better than that? Look at you. You got nothing. No money, no prospects, no way out. Girls like you end up in the snow with their throats cut, or you end up working for men like me. Only difference is how long it takes you to figure that out." Evelyn's hands tightened on the suitcase handle. She wanted to scream, wanted to run, but there was nowhere to go. The train was dead, the town was hostile, and the mountains behind Black Hollow were a frozen graveyard where nothing survived. "I said no." The man's face darkened. "Stupid bitch. When you're starving in 3 days, don't come crying." "She won't." The voice came from behind Evelyn, low and rough as gravel scraped over iron. She spun around. He stood 15 feet away, just beyond the edge of the lamplight, and for a second Evelyn's brain refused to process what she was seeing. Not a man. A mountain made flesh. He towered over 7 feet tall, wrapped in animal hides, so torn and filthy they looked like they'd been skinned off something dead for months. His hair hung long and matted, black streaked with gray. His face was hidden behind a thick, unkempt beard, but his eyes, pale gray, sharp as broken glass, burned through the shadows. He didn't move, didn't blink, just stood there like a piece of the wilderness that had decided to take human shape. The man in the fur coat went white. "Jesus Christ," he whispered. "Rowan." The giant said nothing. I didn't know she was spoken for. I swear. Leave." One word, spoken quietly, but the man in the fur coat stumbled backward like he'd been shoved, turned, and half ran toward the saloon district. Evelyn's heart hammered against her ribs. She should run too. Every instinct screamed at her to get away from this creature, this nightmare dressed in rotting pelts and silence. But she didn't move, because beneath the fear, something else stirred. The way he'd spoken, one word, no wasted breath, reminded her of her father, a mining engineer, a man who thought in measurements and facts, who never used 3 words when one would do. And the way he stood, perfectly still, weight balanced, hands loose at his sides, that wasn't wildness. That was discipline, control. The giant's eyes shifted to her. Up close she could see his face now, strong bones beneath the beard, scars across his knuckles, dirt ground so deep into his skin it looked permanent. "You need shelter," he said. Not a question, a statement. Evelyn's voice cracked when she answered. "Yes." "You have money?" "No." "Family?" "No." "Anyone coming for you?" Evelyn hesitated. The debt collectors would come eventually. They always did. But admitting that felt like signing her own death warrant. "No," she lied. The giant studied her for a long moment. Evelyn had the unsettling feeling he could see straight through her skull into every secret she'd tried to bury. Then he nodded once. "Marry me." Evelyn's breath caught. "What?" "The frontier doesn't tolerate women alone. You need a husband or you'll be dead by spring. I need—" He paused, and for the first time, something flickered across his face, something almost human. "I need someone who won't ask questions." "You're insane." "Probably. No emotion, just fact. But you're out of options." He was right, and they both knew it. Evelyn looked back at Black Hollow, at the saloons vomiting drunks into the street, at the broken windows and crooked buildings, at the man in the fur coat watching from a doorway with hatred in his eyes. She looked at the train tracks disappearing into snow and darkness. No way back. No way forward. Only up. Into the mountains where, according to the whispers she'd heard on the train, men went to die and ghosts went to hide. Evelyn turned back to the giant. "What's your name?" "Rowan Hale." "I'm Evelyn Mercer." She swallowed hard. "If I marry you, what happens?" "You come with me into the Iron Fang range, you survive winter, you stay out of my way." "And if I can't survive?" For the first time, something that might have been a smile touched the corner of his mouth. "Then you'll die cleaner than you would have here." Evelyn looked into those pale gray eyes and made a choice she knew she'd regret. "All right," she whispered. "I'll marry you. I'll accept." The ceremony took 11 minutes. The preacher was drunk. The witness was a half-dead prospector who could barely sign his name, and the vows were spoken in a freezing shack that smelled like mildew and rat poison. Evelyn Mercer became Evelyn Hale in front of a crooked cross and a man who looked at her like she was cargo, not a wife. When it was over, Rowan handed the preacher $2 silver and walked out without a word. Evelyn followed, her heart pounding, her hands numb with cold and terror. Outside, Rowan had a pack mule loaded with supplies and a rifle slung across his back. He glanced at Evelyn's thin coat and useless city shoes, grunted something that might have been disapproval, and pulled a bundle of furs from the mule. "Put these on." The pelts were heavy, stinking, and warm. Evelyn wrapped them around herself, trying not to gag at the smell of old blood and wild animal. "Can you walk?" "Yes." "Then move." They left Black Hollow as the sun died behind the mountains. No one said goodbye. No one watched them go. The town swallowed their presence like it had never existed, and within an hour, the lights of civilization vanished completely. The Iron Fang range swallowed them whole. The first night nearly killed her. Rowan moved through the darkness like a creature born to it, navigating frozen trails that Evelyn couldn't even see. The temperature dropped so fast her lungs burned with every breath. Her feet went numb inside her useless shoes. She fell 6 times in the first mile. On the 7th fall, she stayed down. Rowan stopped, looked back, said nothing. "I can't," Evelyn gasped. "I can't do this." He walked back to her, crouched down, and stared at her with those unreadable gray eyes. "You can die here," he said quietly, "or you can get up." "I'm trying." "No, you're quitting." He stood. "I don't carry quitters." Something hot and furious flared in Evelyn's chest. She'd scrubbed floors until her hands bled. She'd run across 4 states with nothing but a suitcase and shame. She'd survived things that should have broken her, and she'd be damned if some silent mountain bastard was going to leave her in the snow like garbage. Evelyn forced herself to her feet, teeth clenched, tears freezing on her cheeks. "Move!" she hissed. Rowan's expression didn't change, but he turned and kept walking. Evelyn followed. They climbed for hours through darkness so complete it felt like drowning. The wind screamed, the cold bit through the furs like knives. Evelyn's legs shook with exhaustion, but she didn't fall again. When Rowan finally stopped, they were standing in front of a cliff face that looked like solid rock. He pressed his hand against the stone, and something shifted. A door, hidden so perfectly in the rock that Evelyn would have walked past it 100 times without seeing it. Rowan pushed it open, revealing a narrow tunnel that disappeared into blackness. Inside, Evelyn hesitated. Every instinct screamed that following the stranger into a cave was suicide. But the wind howled behind her, and the alternative was freezing to death in the dark. She stepped inside. The door closed behind them with a sound like a tomb sealing shut. Rowan struck a match, lit a torch mounted on the wall, and the tunnel blazed with firelight. It wasn't a cave. It was architecture. The walls were smooth, carved by human hands. Support beams reinforced the ceiling. The floor had been leveled and cleared of debris. This wasn't some animal den or natural shelter. This was built. "What is this place?" Evelyn whispered. Rowan didn't answer. He just walked deeper into the tunnel, and Evelyn followed because there was no other choice. The passage wound upward through the mountain for what felt like miles. Evelyn's exhaustion turned into a kind of numb delirium. Her mind couldn't process what she was seeing, couldn't reconcile the savage hermit in animal pelts with the precision engineering of this hidden route. Then the tunnel opened up, and Evelyn stopped breathing. They stood on a ledge overlooking a valley that shouldn't exist. Hidden deep inside the mountains, sheltered by peaks on all sides, a pocket of impossible warmth bloomed in the frozen wilderness. Steam rose from natural hot springs scattered across the valley floor. Pine trees grew thick and green. A river cut through the center, unfrozen, glittering in the moonlight. And in the heart of it all, a structure that made Evelyn's mind stutter. Not a cabin, a fortress. 3 stories tall, built from cedar beams and iron plating, with glass windows that reflected the starlight like a cathedral. Impossible architecture rising from the wilderness like a fever dream. Evelyn turned to Rowan, her voice barely a whisper. "Who are you?" For the first time since they'd met, Rowan Hale looked at her with something other than cold calculation. He looked at her with exhaustion, old pain, the weight of years buried so deep they'd turned to stone. "I used to be someone important," he said quietly. "Now I'm just the man who survived." He walked down the trail toward the fortress, leaving Evelyn alone on the ledge, staring at the impossible kingdom hidden above the clouds. And somewhere in the back of her mind, a terrible certainty took root. She hadn't married a hermit. She'd married a ghost. The fortress was even stranger up close. The outer walls were reinforced with iron plating salvaged from, what, train cars? Industrial machinery? Evelyn couldn't tell. The windows were real glass, expensive and flawless, set into frames carved with precision that spoke of professional craftsmanship. The front door was 12 feet tall and built from cedar so thick an axe would break before it did. Rowan pushed it open with one hand. Inside, warmth hit Evelyn like a physical blow. Heat radiated from somewhere deep in the building, furnaces maybe, or the hot springs channeled underground. The entry hall was massive, lit by oil lamps mounted on the walls. And everywhere were books. Shelves lined the walls, floor to ceiling, crammed with volumes and leather bindings. Technical manuals, architectural journals, engineering texts, languages Evelyn recognized and some she didn't. "Jesus," she breathed. Rowan ignored her. He shrugged off his pack, hung his rifle on a rack by the door, and pulled off the animal pelts like they were a costume he was done wearing. Beneath the furs, he wore simple clothes, wool shirt, canvas trousers, heavy boots. Clean, well-made, nothing like the savage persona he'd presented in Black Hollow. Without the pelts and the shadows, Evelyn could finally see him clearly. Tall, taller than any man she'd ever met. Broad-shouldered, heavily muscled from years of hard labor. His hair was long but cleaner than she'd expected, tied back with a leather cord. His beard hid most of his face, but his eyes, those pale gray eyes, were sharp and intelligent. He looked at her, and Evelyn suddenly felt very small and very foolish. "There's a room upstairs," Rowan said. "Yeah, and second door on the left. You'll sleep there." "What about you?" "I'll be in my workshop." Do you need help with anything?" "No. I can cook, clean. I'm good with numbers if you need." "I don't need anything from you." His voice was flat, final. "I needed a wife on paper so the frontier would leave me alone. You needed protection from whatever you're running from. We both got what we wanted. Stay out of my way, and we'll be fine." Evelyn's cheeks burned. "I'm not running from anything." Rowan's eyes flicked to the raw skin on her hands, the mended dress, the way she'd flinched when the man in the fur coat got too close. "Everyone in Black Hollow is running from something," he said quietly. "You're just better at lying about it than most." He turned and walked deeper into the fortress, disappearing through a doorway that led to what sounded like machinery, gears turning, water flowing, metal on metal. Evelyn stood alone in the entry hall, surrounded by books and silence and the terrible weight of her own choices. She climbed the stairs. The room Rowan had assigned her was small but clean, a bed with real blankets, a wood stove already burning, a window overlooking the valley. Evelyn sat on the edge of the bed and let herself cry for the first time in weeks. Not because she was afraid, because she was exhausted. Exhausted from running, from lying, from pretending she was stronger than she felt, from the bone-deep loneliness of survival. She cried until there was nothing left, then stripped off her filthy clothes and crawled under the blankets. Sleep came fast and heavy, but in her dreams she heard machinery turning, gears clicking, water rushing through pipes hidden in the walls. And when she woke before dawn, shivering in the gray light, she realized something that made her stomach twist. The fortress wasn't just warm, it was engineered. Someone had channeled the hot springs through an underground system, heating the entire structure from below. Someone had installed ventilation, plumbing, glass windows in a place where glass shouldn't exist. Someone had built this impossible place with knowledge that didn't belong in the wilderness. Evelyn got dressed, went downstairs, and found Rowan in a room she hadn't seen the night before. The workshop. It was enormous, easily 50 feet across, and filled with things that made Evelyn's mind stutter. Drafting tables covered in blueprints, machinist tools, a forge built into the corner, shelves stacked with mechanical parts, gears, springs, copper wiring, half-finished inventions scattered across workbenches, devices Evelyn couldn't name, built with precision that spoke of professional training, and on the far wall, framed in glass like a museum piece, a newspaper clipping. Evelyn crossed the room and read it. Ronan Hale, engineering prodigy, vanishes after factory scandal. Philadelphia, 1881. The industrial world reels from the mysterious disappearance of Ronan Hale, the 29-year-old engineer whose revolutionary designs transformed modern manufacturing. Hale vanished 3 days after the collapse of the Whitmore textile mill, which killed 47 workers, including Hale's younger brother, Thomas. Investigators found evidence of structural failures deliberately concealed by investors. Hale's last known location was a confrontation with mill owner Gerald Whitmore, who was found dead 2 days later from a fall. Authorities seek Hale for questioning, but sources close to the family believe he may have taken his own life. The article was dated 6 years ago. Evelyn's hands trembled as she lowered the clipping. She turned around. Ronan, stood in the doorway, watching her with those unreadable gray eyes. "Now you know," he said quietly. "You killed him." It wasn't a question. I pushed him down a flight of stairs after he laughed about covering up my brother's death. No emotion, just fact. He broke his neck. I left before they could arrest me. They think you're dead. Good. Evelyn's mind raced. If anyone finds out who you are, no one will. Rowan crossed the workshop, moving toward a workbench. I destroyed every connection to my old life, changed my name, burned my credentials. The man I used to be doesn't exist anymore. Then why keep the article? Rowan's hand stilled on the workbench. For a long moment he said nothing. Then quietly, so I don't forget why I left. Evelyn looked at the blueprints scattered across the tables. Designs for water systems, heating mechanisms, structural supports. Work that could have changed the world if it hadn't been buried in these mountains. "You were famous," she said softly. "You could have rebuilt your reputation, started over somewhere else." "I didn't want to rebuild." Rowan's voice was hard. "I wanted to disappear. Everything I built in that old life got people killed. Every innovation I created made rich men richer while workers died in buildings I designed. My brother—" His voice cracked just slightly. "My brother died because I was too blind to see what I was part of." "That wasn't your fault." "It was exactly my fault." Rowan turned to face her, and for the first time, Evelyn saw real emotion in his eyes. Pain, old and deep as a wound that never healed. "I knew the investors cut corners. I knew they ignored safety protocols, but I told myself it wasn't my responsibility. I just designed the buildings. What they did with them wasn't my problem. Until it was. Until my brother's body was pulled from rubble that collapsed because Gerald Whitmore used cheaper materials than my specifications required." Rowan's jaw tightened. "So I killed him. And then I came here to build something that couldn't be corrupted, couldn't be stolen, couldn't hurt anyone but me." Evelyn looked around the workshop, at the inventions, the blueprints, the years of solitary work. "You've been alone here for 6 years?" "Yes." "Why did you come down to Black Hollow for supplies? Why risk being seen?" Rowan's expression darkened. "Because winter's coming early this year, harder than usual. I needed materials I couldn't make myself." "And you needed a wife?" "I needed the town to stop asking questions." Rowan leaned against the workbench, his voice dropping. "Every time I went down for supplies, someone asked why I lived alone, where my family was. A single man in the wilderness draws attention. A married man just looks like a hermit taking care of his wife. So I'm camouflage." "Yes." The bluntness stung, but Evelyn couldn't argue with it. She was using him just as much as he was using her. "What happens now?" she asked. "You stay here through winter. In spring, if you want to leave, I'll take you to another town. Give you enough money to start over somewhere the debt collectors can't find you." Evelyn's stomach dropped. "How did you—" "You flinched when that man got too close in Black Hollow. You keep checking over your shoulder, and you lied when I asked if anyone was coming for you." Rowan's eyes pinned her in place. "I've spent 6 years hiding from people who want me dead or in prison. I know what running looks like." Evelyn's defenses crumbled. "It's not— I didn't do anything wrong. I didn't ask. My father died in a mining collapse. The investors blamed the workers and demanded compensation for lost equipment. My family inherited the debt. Her voice broke. "I couldn't pay it, so I ran." "How much?" $17,000. Rowan didn't even blink. "That's a death sentence for most people." "I know." Evelyn wrapped her arms around herself. "I've been running for 2 years. They keep finding me, and when they do—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Rowan studied her for a long moment. Then he turned to one of the workbenches, opened a drawer, and pulled out a leather bag. He opened it, revealing stacks of bills and gold coins. $43,000, he said quietly. "What's left of my old fortune after I liquidated everything and disappeared. Take 17. Pay off your debt. You'll be free." Evelyn stared at the money like it was a hallucination. I can't. Why not?" "Because I have nothing to give you in return." Rowan closed the bag and put it back in the drawer. "Then earn it." "How?" He gestured at the workshop. "I've been working alone for 6 years. My organizational systems are a disaster. My record keeping is worse. I have designs scattered across 50 notebooks with no index. Prototypes that work but no documentation. If you can bring order to this chaos, the money's yours." Evelyn looked at the mountains of blueprints, the half-finished inventions, the years of brilliant work buried under neglect. She looked at Rowan, this broken, brilliant man hiding from a world that had destroyed him, and she made a decision that surprised her. "All right," she said. "I'll help you." "Good." Rowan turned back to his workbench. "Start with the blueprints. Catalog everything by category and date. Use the empty notebooks on the shelf for the index." "Rowan?" He glanced back. "Thank you," Evelyn said quietly. For the first time since they'd met, something almost warm flickered across Rowan's face. "Don't thank me yet," he said. "Winter up here will make you regret every choice you've ever made." Then he went back to work, and Evelyn began the long process of learning who she'd really married. The days blurred together in a rhythm Evelyn had never experienced. She woke before dawn in a room warmed by underground springs. Ate simple breakfasts Rowan prepared with mechanical efficiency: oatmeal, dried fruit, coffee, so strong it tasted like punishment. Then she descended into the workshop and lost herself in cataloging the scattered genius of a man who'd spent 6 years building miracles no one would ever see. The blueprints were extraordinary. Heating systems that used geothermal energy, water purification through layered filtration, greenhouses designed to trap warmth and extend growing seasons, structural supports that could withstand earthquakes, ventilation systems that prevented smoke buildup in enclosed spaces. Every design solved problems that killed people on the frontier: cold, disease, fire, hunger. And all of it had been buried in this mountain fortress because the man who created it couldn't trust the world not to corrupt it. Evelyn worked 12 hours a day, organizing, indexing, repairing water-damaged pages. Her hands cramped, her eyes burned. But for the first time in years, she felt useful, needed. Rowan barely spoke to her. He worked in a different corner of the workshop, focused on some project Evelyn couldn't decipher. Gears and pistons and copper wiring arranged in configurations that made no sense. But sometimes, she'd catch him watching her, not with suspicion, not with interest, with something that looked almost like relief. 3 weeks into her stay, the first real storm hit. Evelyn woke to a sound like the mountains screaming. Wind hammered the fortress walls with enough force to shake the windows. Snow fell so thick the world outside disappeared into white chaos. She stumbled downstairs and found Rowan checking the structural supports, his face tight with concentration. "Is this normal?" Evelyn shouted over the roar of the wind. "For the Iron Fang range?" Rowan tested a beam, then moved to the next. "Yes, this is why no one lives up here." "How long will it last? 3 days? Maybe 4? He glanced at her. "We're safe. The fortress is built to handle worse than this." But Evelyn heard the edge in his voice. The storm wasn't the problem. "What's wrong?" Rowan hesitated, then pointed to the window. "The valley's geothermal activity keeps it warm, but if the storm gets cold enough, fast enough, it can freeze the springs before they reach the surface. If that happens, we lose heat and water, and the greenhouses die." Rowan's jaw tightened. "I've reinforced the systems every year, but this storm came earlier than expected. If the temperature drops below—" A crack echoed through the fortress. Both of them froze. Rowan swore, the first time Evelyn had heard him curse, and ran toward the back of the building. Evelyn followed. They burst into a chamber Evelyn had never seen before. It was built around a massive shaft that descended deep into the mountain, surrounded by pipes and mechanisms that channeled heat upward. One of the main pipes had split. Steam poured from the crack, filling the chamber with scalding mist. The temperature was already dropping. "How do we fix it?" Evelyn shouted. "We don't." Rowan stared at the damage, his expression dark. "I'd need to go down into the shaft to weld a patch. The heat down there would kill me in minutes. There has to be a way." "There isn't." Rowan turned away. "We seal this chamber, conserve what heat we have left, and hope the storm breaks before the fortress freezes." Evelyn grabbed his arm. "You spent 6 years building this place. You're telling me you don't have a solution?" "I'm telling you, some problems don't have solutions." Rowan's voice cracked with frustration. "I designed fail-safes, backups, redundancies, but I'm one man, and this is a mountain, and eventually the wilderness wins." They stood in the steam-filled chamber, the sound of cracking ice echoing from below, and Evelyn saw something she hadn't expected. Fear. Not for himself. For the fortress. For the work. For the fragile kingdom he'd built from nothing. "What if we reinforce the heat retention in the upper levels?" Evelyn said quickly. "Sealed the lower chambers to trap warmth. Use the greenhouses as insulation." "That won't generate new heat." "No, but it'll buy us time." Evelyn met his eyes. "You built this place to survive, so let it survive. We adapt." Rowan stared at her. Then slowly he nodded. All right, he said. We adapt. They worked for 60 hours straight, sealed lower chambers with insulation torn from storage, redirected remaining heat to the living quarters, moved critical equipment to the warmest rooms, dismantled parts of the greenhouse structure to reinforce the upper levels. Evelyn's hands blistered, her muscles screamed, but she didn't stop, and neither did Rowan. They worked in tandem, communicating in shorthand, anticipating each other's movements. Engineer and organizer, builder and problem solver, partners. On the third day, the storm broke. Evelyn stumbled to the window and saw the sun bleeding through the clouds, pale and weak, but there. She turned around. Rowan stood in the center of the workshop, covered in grime and soot, staring at the walls like he couldn't quite believe they were still standing. "We did it," Evelyn whispered. Rowan didn't answer. He just sat down on the floor, leaned back against a workbench, and closed his eyes. Evelyn sat down beside him. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Then, quietly, Rowan said, "I've been alone up here for 6 years. I told myself I didn't need anyone, that isolation was safer. And now?" He opened his eyes and looked at her. "Now I think I was lying to myself." Evelyn's breath caught. "I'm still leaving in spring," she said softly. "Once I've earned enough to pay off my debt." "I know. We're not." "I know," Rowan said again. "You need freedom. I need solitude. Nothing's changed." But they both knew that was a lie. Something had changed. In the middle of a storm that should have killed them, in a fortress hidden from the world, two people who'd spent years running from their pasts had found something neither of them expected: a reason to stop running. The weeks that followed were the strangest of Evelyn's life. She and Rowan fell into a rhythm that felt less like a business arrangement and more like something else, something neither of them had words for. They worked together in the mornings. Rowan taught her how to read engineering diagrams, how to identify structural weaknesses, how to think in systems instead of isolated problems. Evelyn taught him how to organize his thoughts, how to document his work so someone else could understand it, how to see value in things beyond pure function. In the evenings, they sat by the fire and talked, not about the past, not about the future, just about ideas, problems, questions that had no easy answers. "Why did you become an engineer?" Evelyn asked one night. Rowan stared into the flames. "My father was a bridge builder. He used to take me and my brother to construction sites when we were kids. I watched him turn empty air into structures that carried thousands of people safely across rivers and valleys." He paused. "I wanted to build things that mattered, things that helped people. And instead you built things that killed them." "Yes." The word came out flat and hard. "I told myself I was just the designer, that I couldn't control what investors did with my work. But that was cowardice. I knew what they were doing, and I looked away because the money was good and the recognition felt—" He stopped. "It felt like I was important. You were important. I was complicit." Rowan's hands tightened on his knees. "After Thomas died, I couldn't keep pretending, so I destroyed it. All of it. My reputation, my career, my name. I came here to build something clean." Evelyn was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I think you're punishing yourself for being human." Rowan looked at her sharply. "You made mistakes," Evelyn continued. "You trusted people you shouldn't have trusted. You prioritized the wrong things. But you didn't kill your brother. The investors did. And when you realized what you were part of, you didn't make excuses. You acted. I killed a man. You killed a murderer." Evelyn's voice was steady. "Gerald Whitmore covered up deaths to protect his profits. He laughed about your brother's corpse, and you made him answer for it. That doesn't make it justice." "Maybe not, but it's more than most people get." Rowan stared at her like he was seeing her for the first time. "You're not afraid of me," he said quietly. "Should I be?" "Most people are. Most people are idiots." Evelyn leaned back in her chair. "You saved my life in Black Hollow. You've given me shelter, safety, and a chance to escape the debt that's been drowning me. You're a lot of things, Rowan Hale, but you're not a monster." Something shifted in Rowan's expression, something that looked almost like hope. "What about you?" he asked. Why did you run for 2 years instead of just declaring bankruptcy? Evelyn's smile faded. Because the men my father owed don't accept bankruptcy. They want blood. If I'd stayed in Philadelphia, I would have been... She couldn't finish. They would have sold you. Yes. The word came out barely above a whisper. Rowan's jaw tightened. When spring comes, I'll make sure you have enough money to disappear somewhere they'll never find you. I don't want to keep running. Then what do you want? Evelyn looked around the workshop, at the blueprints, the inventions, the kingdom built from brilliance and isolation. I want to stop being afraid, she said softly. I want to build something that lasts. I want to matter. Rowan held her gaze. You already do, he said, and for the first time in years, Evelyn believed him. But peace never lasts on the frontier, and in the frozen hell of Black Hollow, 300 miles below, a man named Gideon Cross was asking dangerous questions about steam rising from the mountains, and a hermit who might not be as poor as he pretended. Winter settled into the Iron Fang range like a fist closing around prey. The storms came harder, the cold bit deeper. And in the hidden valley, Evelyn learned what it meant to survive in a place the world had forgotten. She learned that Rowan's silence wasn't coldness. It was the sound of a mind constantly calculating. Temperature drops, structural stress, resource consumption. He lived inside equations most people couldn't see, always 3 steps ahead of disaster. She learned that his hands, scarred and rough as they were, could perform surgery on broken machinery with the precision of an artist. She watched him repair a fractured gear assembly using tools he'd forged himself, his movements so exact they seemed rehearsed. And she learned that beneath the beard and the muscle, in the deliberate isolation, Rowan Hale was desperately, achingly lonely. He never said it, but Evelyn saw it in the way he'd pause when she entered a room, like he'd forgotten what it felt like to share space with another person. In the way he'd start to say something, then stop himself, as if he'd lost the habit of conversation. One morning, 6 weeks into her stay, Evelyn found him standing at the workshop window, staring out at the valley with an expression that made her chest tighten. What's wrong? Rowan didn't turn around. I built this place to be completely self-sufficient. No dependencies, no weak points. But I missed something. What? Company. He said it like he was admitting a structural flaw. I designed everything around the assumption that I'd be alone. And for 6 years that worked. But now... He stopped. Evelyn moved to stand beside him. Now? Now the fortress feels empty when you're not in it. The words hung between them like smoke. Evelyn's heart hammered. Rowan, I told you. I know. You're leaving in spring. You have your own life to build. He finally looked at her, and the rawness in his eyes nearly broke her. I'm not asking you to stay. I'm just telling you that for 6 years, I convinced myself I didn't need anyone. And you've proven me wrong. Before Evelyn could respond, a sound echoed from somewhere deep in the mountain. Distant. Mechanical. Wrong. Rowan's expression changed instantly. The vulnerability vanished, replaced by sharp focus. Stay here. What was that? I don't know. He crossed to the weapon rack, pulled down the rifle. But nothing should be making noise in the lower tunnels. I'm coming with you. No. Rowan, if something's down there, I need to move fast. His voice was hard, final. Stay in the workshop, lock the door behind me. If I'm not back in an hour, take the emergency pack from the closet and head for Black Hollow. Fear spiked through Evelyn's chest. What do you think is down there? Probably nothing. A rock fall, ice shifting. But his hands were already checking the rifle, loading ammunition with practiced efficiency. I'll be back. He disappeared into the corridor before Evelyn could argue. She locked the door, stood in the center of the workshop, listened to the silence. 53 minutes later, Rowan returned. He wasn't alone. Evelyn heard voices before she saw them. Rowan's low rumble and another voice, younger, panicked. She unlocked the door. Rowan stood in the corridor, supporting a kid who couldn't have been older than 17. The boy's face was gray with cold, his clothes soaked through, his lips blue. Get blankets, Rowan said, and heat water. He's hypothermic. Evelyn didn't ask questions. She ran. They worked in tandem, the way they had during the storm. Stripped the kid's frozen clothes, wrapped him in blankets, fed him warm broth in careful sips while his body shook violently. It took an hour before the kid could speak. His name was Daniel. He was a runner for the Black Hollow trading post, sent into the mountains with a delivery for a mining camp that turned out to be abandoned. He'd gotten lost on the way back, followed steam vents hoping they'd lead to shelter, found the hidden entrance to Rowan's Valley by accident. "I'm sorry," Daniel whispered, his teeth still chattering. "I didn't mean to. I was just trying not to die." "You're alive," Rowan said. "That's what matters." "How did you find him?" Evelyn asked. "He triggered one of my perimeter alarms. I have tripwires in the lower tunnels. Old habit." Rowan's jaw tightened. If he'd gone any deeper, he would have fallen into the shaft. Daniel looked around the workshop, his eyes wide. "What is this place?" "Shelter," Rowan said flatly. Nothing more. But the kid wasn't stupid. Evelyn could see him cataloging everything, the books, the machinery, the evidence of wealth and knowledge hidden in the wilderness. "You're the hermit," Daniel said slowly. "The one everyone in Black Hollow talks about. Savage Rowan. That's what they call me. They say you're crazy, that you eat people who get lost in the mountains." Rowan's expression didn't change. "Do I look like I'm about to eat you?" "No, sir." Daniel swallowed hard. "They also say you're dangerous." "I am, but not to kids who get lost in snowstorms." Rowan stood. "You'll stay here until the weather clears. Then I'll take you back to Black Hollow." "I can't. They'll ask questions about where I was." "Then lie." Rowan's voice was cold. "Tell them you found a cave. Tell them you nearly died. Tell them whatever keeps them from looking for this place. But if anyone comes asking about valleys or fortresses or anything that doesn't match the story of a dumb kid who got lost, I'll know." The threat was implicit. Daniel nodded quickly. Evelyn waited until the kid was asleep in the guest room before she cornered Rowan in the workshop. "You can't send him back to Black Hollow." "Why not?" "Because he's seen too much. Even if he lies, people will notice things. The way he talks about you will change. Someone will get curious." Rowan's hand stilled on the blueprint he'd been studying. "What are you suggesting?" "Keep him here, at least through winter." "Absolutely not." "Rowan, I saved his life. That's where my responsibility ends." Rowan's voice was hard. "I'm not running an orphanage for lost kids." "He's 17, alone, working for barely enough to survive." Evelyn stepped closer. "How is that different from me?" "You're an adult who made a choice. He's a kid who stumbled into something he shouldn't have seen. And now he's seen it. So either you trust him, or you—" Evelyn stopped, her stomach turning. "What's the alternative?" Rowan met her eyes, and Evelyn saw the calculation there, the cold math of survival. "I'm not going to hurt him," Rowan said quietly. "But I'm not keeping him either. Too much risk." "Risk of what? Having another person around? Building something bigger than just you and your guilt?" "Watch it." "No." Evelyn's voice shook with anger. "You've spent 6 years hiding up here because you're terrified of being part of the world again, terrified of building something someone could corrupt. But that kid downstairs isn't corruption. He's just a person who needs help. And you know what happens to people like him in Black Hollow." Rowan's jaw tightened. "This isn't about helping people. It's about protecting what I've built." "Then what's the point of building it?" Evelyn shot back. "You've created this incredible place. Heating, water, shelter, enough space for 20 people. And you're using it to hide, alone, because you're too afraid to trust anyone." "I trust you." "Do you? Or am I just useful until spring, when you can send me away with money and go back to being alone?" The silence that followed was brutal. Rowan turned away from her, his shoulders tight. "You don't understand what it's like." "Then explain it to me." "I built things that killed people, Evelyn. My designs, my name on the blueprints. And when I tried to fix it, to make it right, I ended up a murderer hiding in the mountains." His voice cracked. "So yes, I'm afraid. I'm afraid that if I build something good up here, something that actually helps people, I'll find a way to destroy that too." Evelyn's anger drained away, replaced by something achingly sad. She crossed the workshop and stood in front of him, forcing him to look at her. "You're not that person anymore," she said softly. "The man who designed buildings for corrupt investors? He's gone. You killed him the same day you pushed Gerald Whitmore down those stairs. She touched his arm. The man standing in front of me spends his days building systems to keep people warm and safe, who rescued a stranger from a blizzard, who saved a kid from freezing to death instead of protecting his precious solitude. Rowan's eyes searched her face. What if I fail them? Then you fail, and you try again. That's what living means. For a long moment, Rowan said nothing. Then quietly, he can stay through winter, but if he brings trouble here, it's on you. Evelyn smiled, just a little. I'll take that risk. Daniel stayed. And over the following weeks, the fortress changed in ways none of them expected. The kid was smart, smarter than his circumstances suggested. He picked up engineering concepts faster than Evelyn had, asked questions that made Rowan rethink old designs, and worked harder than anyone with that much to prove. He also talked, constantly. After 6 years of silence, the fortress filled with Daniel's chatter, stories from Black Hollow, questions about machinery, jokes that fell flat but kept coming anyway. Rowan pretended to be annoyed, but Evelyn noticed the way he'd pause his work to answer Daniel's questions, the way he'd started leaving books on the dining table for the kid to read, the way something in his expression softened when Daniel laughed. You're getting attached, Evelyn said one evening. Rowan grunted, not looking up from the gear assembly he was repairing. I'm tolerating him. You gave him your brother's old room. It was empty. You're teaching him engineering. He asked questions. I answered them. Rowan. Evelyn waited until he looked at her. It's okay to care about him. Rowan's hand stilled. I don't... He stopped. Started again. Thomas was 17 when he died. Same age as Daniel. Same build. Sometimes when he laughs, His voice broke. Evelyn moved to sit beside him. I know. If something happens to him because I let him stay, then we'll deal with it, together. Rowan looked at her, and something shifted in his expression, something warm and dangerous and terrifying. You keep saying we, he said quietly. Evelyn's breath caught. I know. I thought you were leaving in spring. I thought so too. The air between them felt charged, electric. Evelyn? A crash echoed from downstairs. They both jumped up, running toward the source. They found Daniel in the storage room, standing over a broken crate, his face white with shock. I'm sorry, he stammered. I was just looking for... Then Evelyn saw what he was staring at. Inside the broken crate, carefully wrapped and preserved, dozens of blueprints stamped with official seals. Patent documents. Contracts signed in elegant script, all bearing the name Ronan Hale. Daniel looked at Rowan, then at the documents, then back at Rowan. You're him, the kid whispered. You're the engineer, the one who disappeared after the factory collapse. Rowan's expression went cold. Daniel, my father worked in the Whitmore mill. Daniel's voice shook. He died when it collapsed. I was 9 years old. The temperature in the room dropped. Evelyn stepped between them. Daniel, listen. You designed that building. Daniel's eyes were bright with tears. Everyone said you were a genius, that your designs were revolutionary. And then 47 people died because Gerald Whitmore used cheaper materials than my specifications required, Rowan said, his voice like stone. I know. I was there when they pulled the bodies out. Then why did you run? Because I killed him. No hesitation. I confronted Whitmore about the cover-up. He laughed, said the workers were expendable, so I pushed him down a flight of stairs and listened to his neck break. Daniel stared at him. Good. Rowan blinked. What? Good. Daniel's voice was steady now. Whitmore deserved worse. Everyone knew he cut corners. My mother tried to sue him after my father died, but he had lawyers and money, and we had nothing, so he walked away rich while we starved. The kid's hands clenched. I'm glad you killed him. Evelyn let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Rowan looked at Daniel like he was seeing him for the first time. Your father. What was his name? Marcus Webb. He was a machinist. Rowan's expression cracked. I remember him. He flagged a structural issue in the main support system 3 weeks before the collapse, wrote a formal complaint that Whitmore buried. He tried to save people. He did save people. The section he flagged held longer than the rest. 23 workers escaped because your father gave them time. Rowan's voice roughened. He was a better man than I ever was. Daniel shook his head. You built this place. You're still building. That's more than Whitmore ever did. Silence settled over the storage room. Then Rowan did something Evelyn had never seen before. He held out his hand. Daniel stared at it, then took it. I'm sorry about your father, Rowan said quietly. I'm sorry about your brother. They stood there, two people bound by grief and guilt, and something shifted in the fortress. It wasn't just a hiding place anymore. It was becoming something else, something that looked almost like family. But 300 miles away, in the frozen hell of Black Hollow, Gideon Cross was gathering men. Because rumors had a way of spreading on the frontier. Rumors about a kid who disappeared into the mountains and come back different, cleaner, better fed. With knowledge in his eyes that didn't come from caves and survival. Rumors about steam that rose from impossible heights. And rumors about a hermit who might not be as worthless as the town believed. Cross had made his fortune finding things other people missed. Abandoned mines, forgotten land claims, secrets buried in snow and stone. And he had a feeling the Iron Fang range was hiding the biggest secret of all. The first sign of trouble came 2 weeks later. Evelyn was working in the workshop when Rowan burst through the door, his face grim. We have a problem. What kind of problem? The kind with rifles. Rowan crossed to the weapon rack. One of my perimeter alarms just triggered. Multiple people. Moving in formation. Evelyn's stomach dropped. Daniel? Already securing the lower levels. Rowan loaded his rifle with mechanical efficiency. Get to the safe room. There's a hidden passage behind the bookshelf in my quarters. If they breach the fortress, I'm not hiding while you fight them alone. Evelyn, no. She grabbed a hunting knife from the tool bench. You taught me how to survive up here. That includes this. Rowan looked at her for a long moment. Then he handed her a revolver. Stay behind me. Don't shoot unless you have to. And if I tell you to run, you run. Understood? Understood. They moved through the fortress in silence, Daniel joining them at the main entrance. The kid had armed himself with a rifle and looked terrified but steady. How many? Daniel whispered. At least 6. Maybe more. Rowan checked the view through a narrow window. They're not trying to hide. That means they're confident. Or stupid, Evelyn said. Or both. The knock on the door came 5 minutes later. Not a polite knock. A demand. Rowan opened it. 6 men stood outside, armed with rifles and revolvers. They wore heavy coats, fur-lined boots, and expressions that said they'd done this before. The man in front was older than the others. 50s, maybe. Clean-shaven, well-dressed, with eyes that calculated value the way a butcher measured meat. Rowan Hale. His voice was smooth, educated. Who's asking? Gideon Cross. I'm a land prospector and acquisition specialist. I've heard interesting things about this valley. Then you've heard wrong. Have I? Cross smiled. I've heard about steam rising from the peaks, about a structure that shouldn't exist, about a man living alone in luxury while pretending to be a savage. His eyes traveled over Rowan, the clean clothes beneath the worn coat, the maintained rifle, the evidence of intelligence. You're not what Black Hollow thinks you are. I'm exactly what I appear to be, a hermit who wants to be left alone, with a wife, and a ward, and a fortress that suggests resources I'm very interested in. Cross gestured to the valley behind him. This land isn't claimed, no deeds, no legal ownership, which means it belongs to whoever can hold it. It belongs to me, legally, or just by virtue of being here first. Cross's smile widened. Because I've got 6 men with me now and 20 more coming. We can do this peacefully. You sell me the land, I pay you fairly, everyone walks away happy. Or we can do this the frontier way. Rowan's voice dropped to something cold and dangerous. Get off my land! I don't think you understand the situation. Rowan raised the rifle, not pointing it, just holding it, but the message was clear. Cross's men shifted, hands moving toward weapons. You're outnumbered, Cross said calmly. You're in my valley. Rowan's eyes were ice. Every trail, every tunnel, every stone, I know them all. You think 6 men is enough? I think you're bluffing. Then test me. The tension stretched like a wire about to snap. Then Cross smiled. You've got spirit. I respect that. Tell you what, I'll give you 3 days to reconsider. Think about my offer. Think about what happens to that pretty wife of yours if you choose wrong. His eyes flicked to Evelyn. Frontier's a dangerous place for women. Rowan's finger moved to the trigger. Cross raised his hands. Easy. We're leaving. For now. He turned and walked back toward the trail, his men following. Rowan didn't lower the rifle until they disappeared from sight. Then he turned to Evelyn and Daniel, his face like stone. They'll be back, he said quietly. And next time, they won't ask nicely. Daniel's voice shook. What do we do? Rowan looked at the valley, the fortress, the greenhouses, the springs, everything he'd built over 6 years of solitary work. Then he looked at Evelyn. We prepare for war. The next 3 days were brutal. Rowan moved through the fortress like a machine, checking defenses, reinforcing weak points, setting traps in the tunnels. But Evelyn could see the fear beneath the focus. Not fear of dying, fear of losing everything he'd built, fear of failing to protect the people who'd become his family. On the second night, she found him alone in the workshop, staring at blueprints he'd drawn years ago. What are those? Defenses I designed but never built. His voice was hollow. I told myself I'd never need them. That if I just stayed hidden, the world would leave me alone. You couldn't have known. I should have. Rowan's hands clenched. I've spent 6 years preparing for avalanches and storms and structural failures, but I never prepared for this. For people. Evelyn moved to stand beside him. Then we prepare now. Rowan looked at her. If this goes wrong, so it won't. Evelyn, no. She took his hand. I've watched you predict storms before they form. Calculate structural loads in your head. Build impossible things from nothing. You're the most brilliant man I've ever met. And if Gideon Cross thinks he can take this valley from you, he's about to learn what a mistake feels like. Something flickered across Rowan's face. When did you stop planning to leave in spring? Evelyn's breath caught. I don't know, somewhere between the first storm and now, She stopped. I stopped wanting to. Why? Because for the first time in my life, I'm not running, I'm building. She squeezed his hand. With you. Rowan pulled her closer. If we survive this, when we survive this. When we survive this, he corrected, almost smiling, I want you to stay. Permanently. Not as camouflage, not as help, as what? As the person I build things for. Evelyn's heart hammered. Rowan! The perimeter alarm screamed. They both ran. Cross had lied about waiting 3 days. He'd brought his 20 men early, and they'd come armed for a siege. The attack came at dawn, when the light was thin and deceptive. Rowan saw them through the reinforced windows, 23 men spreading across the valley floor like a disease, armed with rifles and something worse. Dynamite. Enough to bring down half the fortress if they knew where to place it. They're not trying to negotiate, Daniel said, his voice tight with fear. No. Rowan's jaw was set. They're trying to take it. Evelyn watched the men below, her hands steady on the revolver despite the terror clawing at her chest. She'd never shot anyone, never even fired a gun before Rowan had taught her 3 days ago. But she'd killed once, pulled a trigger that ended a life. And if it came to that again, she wouldn't hesitate. What's the plan? She asked. Rowan moved away from the window, his mind already working through scenarios. The valley has 3 entry points. Main entrance where they came through, the north tunnel I use for supply runs, and the emergency shaft on the eastern ridge. They'll try to breach all 3 simultaneously. Can they? If they know what they're doing? Yes. Rowan crossed to a cabinet, pulled out 3 rifles and ammunition. But they don't know the valley. They don't know the terrain, and they don't know what I've built into the mountain. Daniel took one of the rifles, his hand shaking slightly. What do you need me to do? North tunnel. There's a lever 50 feet in, hidden behind a false panel. If anyone tries to come through, pull it. The ceiling collapses, seals the entrance. Rowan's eyes were hard. But once you pull it, there's no going back. That tunnel stays buried. I understand. Evelyn, Rowan turned to her. You're with me on the main approach. An explosion shattered the morning. The southeastern wall of the fortress buckled as dynamite tore through stone and timber. Smoke poured through the breach, and men rushed the opening with rifles raised. Rowan swore viciously. "They're not waiting! Daniel, go! Now!" The kid ran. Rowan grabbed Evelyn's arm, pulling her toward the workshop. "We need to get to the control room. If they breach the lower levels—" Another explosion. Closer this time. The fortress shook. Glass shattered. Somewhere below, men were shouting. They made it to the control room, a space Evelyn had only seen once, filled with levers and valves that regulated water flow, heat distribution, and structural supports throughout the valley. Rowan's hands moved across the controls with desperate precision. "I'm redirecting the hot springs. If I can flood the lower tunnels, won't that trap us too? The upper levels have drainage. They don't." He pulled a lever. Somewhere deep in the mountain, water began to move. "It'll buy us time." Gunfire erupted from the north tunnel. Daniel's position. Evelyn's heart seized. "Rowan! He knows what to do." But there was fear in Rowan's voice, the same fear she felt. They'd brought a child into this, a 17-year-old kid who should have been safe in Black Hollow instead of fighting for his life in a hidden valley. More gunfire. Then a sound like thunder. The north tunnel collapsing. Silence followed, terrible and complete. "Daniel!" Evelyn screamed. No answer. Rowan's face went white. He started toward the door, but Evelyn grabbed him. "If you go down there now, they'll kill you both." "He's a kid. He knows the plan. He'll come back through the emergency route." Evelyn's voice shook. "But if we lose this room, we lose everything." Rowan looked at her, anguish and calculation warring in his eyes. Then he turned back to the controls. It was the hardest thing Evelyn had ever watched him do. The battle turned into a nightmare of smoke and chaos. Cross's men had breached 3 sections of the fortress, moving through rooms they didn't understand, destroying equipment they couldn't value. Evelyn heard them shouting to each other, their voices echoing through corridors. "Nothing but books in here. Check the upper floors. Where's the safe? There's got to be a safe." They thought this was about money, about stealing whatever wealth Rowan had hidden. They had no idea what they were really destroying. Rowan worked in furious silence, his hands flying across valves and levers. Water flooded the lower tunnels. Steam vents opened in strategic locations, filling rooms with scalding mist. Supports released in calculated sequences, making entire sections of the fortress unstable. He was turning his home into a weapon. "How long can we hold them?" Evelyn asked. "Long enough." But his voice said otherwise. Then footsteps pounded up the stairs. Multiple men. Moving fast. Rowan grabbed his rifle. "Get behind the boiler. Rowan, now!" Evelyn dove for cover as the door exploded inward. 3 men burst through, rifles raised. They saw Rowan and fired. The first shot missed, the second didn't. Blood bloomed across Rowan's shoulder. He staggered but didn't fall, returning fire with mechanical precision. 1 man dropped, then another. The third rushed him. They collided like trains. The man was smaller but younger, fueled by adrenaline and greed. He slammed Rowan against the wall, going for the rifle. Evelyn raised her revolver. Her hands shook. The man's back filled her vision. She remembered the weight of the trigger, the sound a body makes when it hits the ground. She fired. The bullet caught the man in the leg. He screamed, releasing Rowan, dropping to the floor. Rowan didn't hesitate. He brought the rifle stock down hard. The man stopped moving. Silence settled over the control room, broken only by ragged breathing. Rowan pressed a hand to his shoulder, blood seeping between his fingers. "Good shot. I was aiming for his back. Still counts." He moved back to the controls, leaving red handprints on the levers. "We need to—" The sound of footsteps, dozens of them, coming from below. Cross had brought the rest of his men. Rowan met Evelyn's eyes. "The emergency shaft. We need to get to it now." "What about Daniel?" "If he made it out of the north tunnel, he'll meet us there. If he didn't—" Rowan's voice broke. "We can't save him if we're dead." They ran, through corridors filled with smoke, past rooms Evelyn had cataloged and organized, now torn apart by men looking for valuables. The workshop was burning, decades of blueprints curling into ash. Evelyn's chest tightened. All that work, all that knowledge, gone. They reached the emergency shaft, a vertical tunnel with iron rungs hammered into stone, leading up to a concealed exit on the eastern ridge. Daniel was there. alive. Bleeding from a cut above his eye, but alive. Thank God, Evelyn breathed. I collapsed the tunnel, Daniel said quickly. Killed 2 of them, maybe 3. I couldn't. He looked at Rowan's shoulder. You're shot. I've had worse. Rowan pushed Daniel toward the shaft. Climb. Don't stop until you reach the top. What about you? I'm right behind you. Daniel started climbing. Evelyn followed. Rowan went last, his injured shoulder making every movement agony. They were halfway up when the explosion hit. The entire mountain shook. The shaft walls cracked, dust and debris rained down. Someone had found the main boiler and blown it. The fortress was dying. Evelyn looked down and saw flames climbing through the lower levels, consuming everything. The workshop, the library, the control room. 6 years of work burning like kindling, and Rowan was watching it all with an expression that tore her heart in half. Keep moving, he said quietly. They climbed. They emerged on the eastern ridge as the sun crested the mountains, painting the snow gold and red. Behind them, smoke poured from the valley. The fortress was a black skeleton against the flames, collapsing section by section. Daniel collapsed in the snow, gasping for air. Evelyn stared at the destruction, unable to process it. Everything gone. Rowan stood at the edge, watching his life's work burn, and said nothing. Then a voice called from below. Rowan, hail! They looked down. Gideon Cross stood at the valley entrance, surrounded by his remaining men. 15, maybe. The rest were dead or injured. You're a stubborn man, Cross shouted. I respect that. But you've lost. Your fortress is burning. Your valley is mine. Rowan raised his rifle. Cross laughed. You're outnumbered and outgunned. What are you going to do? Shoot us all? If I have to, then you'll die up there, and I'll still take everything. Cross's smile was vicious. Or you can come down. Talk like reasonable men. I'll even let your wife and the boy go. Liar, Daniel hissed. Probably. Cross shrugged. But those are your options. Fight and die, or negotiate and maybe live. Rowan's hands tightened on the rifle. Evelyn touched his arm. Don't. It's going to kill us anyway. Maybe, but we're not dead yet. She looked at the valley, at the smoke and flames, at the men below. You spent 6 years building this place. You know every stone, every tunnel, every weakness. They don't. What are you suggesting? That we fight smarter, not harder. Evelyn met his eyes. You taught me that. Rowan looked at her for a long moment. Then he lowered the rifle. Cross, he shouted. You want to talk? Fine. But not down there. Up here. Just you. Unarmed. Cross tilted his head. You think I'm stupid? I think you want this valley more than you want my death. Otherwise, you would have just burned it and left. Rowan's voice was steady. So come up here. Talk. And maybe we both walk away. Cross considered this. Then he handed his rifle to one of his men and started climbing. It took him 15 minutes to reach the ridge, breathing hard, face red with exertion. All right, he panted. I'm here. Let's talk. Rowan waited until Cross caught his breath. Then he hit him. Not with his fist, with words. You want to know what makes this valley valuable? Rowan asked quietly. It's not gold. It's not land. It's knowledge. He gestured to the burning fortress. Every system down there, heating, water, agriculture, I designed them to work in impossible conditions, and you just destroyed all of it. Cross's smile faltered. I can rebuild. With what? The blueprints are ash, the prototypes are melted slag, and I'm the only person who knows how any of it worked. Rowan stepped closer. You didn't conquer anything. You just burned down the only thing worth taking. I still have the land. You have a valley with some hot springs and burned timber. Congratulations. You can sell it to the next idiot for half what you spent getting here. Rowan's eyes were ice. Or you can walk away. Tell your investors the valley was worthless, and I'll forget you tried to murder me and my family. Cross's face darkened. You're bluffing. Am I? Rowan pulled a notebook from his coat. This is the only surviving record of the heating system. The one design that could make a fortune if someone knew how to read it. Want to guess what happens if you kill me? Cross stared at the notebook like it was a snake. Here's my offer, Rowan said. You leave. Now. And I don't hunt you down for what you did here. And if I refuse, Rowan smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. Then you should know something about me. My name isn't really Rowan Hale, it's Ronan Hale, the engineer, the one who killed Gerald Whitmore and disappeared 6 years ago. He let that sink in. I've already murdered one man who threatened me. What makes you think I won't do it again? Cross went pale. You're lying. Ask your men when you get back to Black Hollow. Ask them about the factory scandal, the missing engineer, the body found at the bottom of a staircase. Rowan's voice dropped. And then ask yourself if you really want to fight a man who's already lost everything and has nothing left to fear. The silence stretched like a wire. Then Cross took a step back. This isn't over, he said. Yes, it is. Rowan raised the rifle. Walk away, or find out what happens when you corner a desperate man. Cross stared at him, at the blood on his shoulder, at the cold certainty in his eyes. Then he turned and started down the ridge. Rowan watched him go, the rifle steady in his hands. When Cross reached his men, they spoke in urgent whispers. Then, slowly, they began to retreat, back toward the valley entrance, back toward Black Hollow, away. Evelyn let out a breath she'd been holding for what felt like hours. Did it work? For now. Rowan lowered the rifle. But he'll be back. Men like Cross don't forget. Then we'll be ready. Rowan turned to look at her. We? You think I'm leaving after this? Evelyn gestured to the burning valley. You think I'm going to walk away and let you rebuild this place alone? There's nothing left to rebuild. That's not true. Daniel's voice was quiet but firm. The fortress is gone, but the valley's still here. The springs, the land, and we know how everything worked because you taught us. Rowan looked at the kid. You should go back to Black Hollow, find a real life. Not... He gestured helplessly at the destruction. Not this. This is more real than anything I've ever done. Daniel's jaw set. My father died trying to save people. You've been trying to do the same thing, just differently. I'm not walking away from that. I'm not a hero, Daniel. I'm a murderer hiding in the mountains. You're a man who made mistakes and tried to fix them. Evelyn moved to stand beside Rowan. And you're not alone anymore. Rowan looked at them both. This woman who'd married him out of desperation and stayed out of choice. And this kid who should have died in the North Tunnel, but survived because he was braver than any 17-year-old should have to be. His family. Not by blood. Not by law. By choice. All right, he said quietly. We rebuild. The work started immediately. They salvaged what they could from the ruins. Tools, materials, anything that hadn't burned. The workshop was gone, but the forge still worked. The library was ash, but Rowan's memory held more knowledge than any book. And the valley itself was intact. The springs still flowed. The land still held warmth. The potential still existed. They built temporary shelter in a cave system Rowan had reinforced years ago. It was cramped and cold compared to the fortress, but it was safe, defensible. Home, for now. Evelyn worked alongside Rowan, her hands blistering as she helped clear debris and plan new structures. Daniel threw himself into the labor with the fervor of someone who'd found purpose. But at night, when the work stopped and exhaustion took over, Evelyn saw the truth. Rowan was breaking, not physically. The shoulder wound was healing, but something inside him had cracked when the fortress burned. She found him one night sitting at the valley's edge, staring at the blackened skeleton of his life's work. You should be resting, she said. Can't sleep. Evelyn sat beside him. Talk to me. About what? About whatever's eating you alive. Rowan was quiet for a long time. Then, quietly, I built that fortress to prove I could create something good. Something that couldn't be corrupted or destroyed or used to hurt people. And in 6 hours, it was gone. But we're still here. For how long? Cross will come back, or someone else will. And next time, his voice broke. Next time I might not be able to protect you. You're not responsible for protecting us from everything. Then what am I responsible for? For trying. Evelyn took his hand. For building something worth fighting for. For being the kind of man who saves lost kids and desperate women instead of turning them away. I'm not that man. You are. You just don't see it yet. She squeezed his hand. The fortress was incredible, But it was just a building. What you created with Daniel and me, that's what matters. Rowan looked at her and something in his expression softened. When did you get so wise? Somewhere between scrubbing floors in Philadelphia and marrying a mountain hermit. She smiled. Life's been educational. For the first time since the attack, Rowan laughed. It was a small sound, broken and rough, but it was real. The weeks that followed were brutal. They worked from dawn until dark, rebuilding structures, reinforcing defenses, preparing for the next attack, because they all knew it was coming. Cross hadn't given up. He'd just retreated to plan. Rowan designed new fortifications, smaller, harder to breach, built with the assumption that they'd be attacked again. He taught Daniel and Evelyn how to fight, how to shoot accurately, how to survive in conditions that would kill most people. And slowly something shifted. The valley stopped being just Rowan's hiding place. It became theirs. Daniel suggested a greenhouse design that improved on Rowan's original plans. Evelyn organized supply caches and emergency routes with a precision that made Rowan shake his head in admiration. They were building something new, not a fortress built by one man's guilt, but a home built by three people's hope. One evening, 2 months after the attack, Evelyn found a small leather journal in the debris. It had survived the fire somehow, tucked in a metal box that protected it from the flames. She opened it carefully. The pages were filled with sketches, designs for buildings, calculations for structural loads, and on the last page, dated 6 years ago, a note in Rowan's handwriting. To whoever finds this, I failed. I built things that killed people, and I couldn't live with that truth. So I came here to hide, to disappear, to punish myself in a place no one would ever find me. If you're reading this, it means I'm dead. And maybe that's for the best. Some people don't deserve second chances. Evelyn's throat tightened. She found Rowan in the new workshop, smaller than the old one, but functional. I found something, she said. He looked up from this prototype he was building. What? She handed him the journal. Rowan opened it, read the note. His expression went carefully blank. That was a long time ago, he said. Was it? Evelyn, do you still believe that? That you don't deserve a second chance? Rowan set the journal down. I don't know what I believe anymore. Then let me tell you what I believe. Evelyn crossed to stand in front of him. I believe you're the most stubborn, brilliant, frustrating man I've ever met. I believe you've punished yourself for 6 years for crimes you didn't commit. And I believe that the man who wrote that note, the one who thought he deserved to die alone, isn't the man standing in front of me. How do you know? Because the man standing in front of me saved my life. Saved Daniel's life. Built something beautiful and fought to protect it. She touched his face. That's not a man who's given up. That's a man who's finally learning to live again. Rowan closed his eyes. I'm so tired of fighting. I know. I don't know if I can keep doing this. You don't have to do it alone. Evelyn leaned her forehead against his. That's what I've been trying to tell you. We're in this together now. Rowan's arms came around her, holding her like she was the only thing keeping him standing. And maybe she was. They stood like that for a long time, two people who'd found each other in the worst possible circumstances and somehow made it mean something. Then Daniel's voice echoed from outside. Rowan, Evelyn, you need to see this. They ran. Daniel stood at the valley entrance, pointing down the mountain. There were lights, dozens of them, moving up the trail. They're back, Daniel whispered. But as the lights got closer, Evelyn saw something that made her stomach drop. These weren't Cross's men. These were families, women and children, old people, walking through the snow with packs and desperation in their eyes. Refugees. The lead figure reached the valley entrance and stopped. It was a woman, 40, maybe, thin, exhausted, but alive. We heard there was a place up here, she said, her voice hoarse. A valley where people could survive winter, where someone built things to keep people alive. She looked at Rowan. Please, we have nowhere else to go. Behind her, 24 people stood in the snow, watching with hollow eyes. Rowan stared at them. Then he looked at Evelyn. She saw the question in his eyes, the fear, the old wounds, but she also saw something else, hope. Let them in, she said quietly. Rowan turned back to the woman. You'll work, he said. Everyone works. No exceptions. We will. And you'll follow the rules. No theft, no violence, no putting others at risk. We will. Rowan stepped aside. Welcome to the valley. The people filed past, carrying what little they owned, looking at the burned fortress and the new structures with expressions that mixed hope and disbelief. Daniel moved to help them, directing families to temporary shelters. Evelyn stood beside Rowan, watching as the valley filled with life. You know this changes everything, she said. I know. Cross will see this as a threat. More people means more witnesses, more resistance. Let him. Rowan's voice was steady. I spent 6 years hiding from the world because I was afraid of what I might destroy. But maybe... He paused. Maybe destruction is what I needed. To build something better. Evelyn looked at him. What are you saying? I'm saying I'm done hiding. Rowan met her eyes. Cross wants a war? He'll get one. But not the war he's expecting. What kind of war? Rowan smiled. It was a hard expression, determined. The kind we win. The valley transformed in ways none of them expected. Within 2 weeks, 24 refugees became a community. The woman who'd led them, her name was Margaret, turned out to be a school teacher from a mining camp that had collapsed under corrupt management. She organized the children, taught them to read using charred books salvaged from Rowan's library, and brought order to chaos with the efficiency of someone who'd survived worse. An old man named Samuel had been a carpenter before his hands got too shaky for fine work. But he could still teach, and within days he had 3 younger men building frames for new structures using techniques Rowan had never seen. A couple named Henrik and Clara ran a makeshift kitchen, stretching supplies that should have fed 8 people into meals for 30. They didn't complain, they just worked. And slowly, impossibly, the valley began to feel less like a fortress and more like something Rowan had never intended to build. A town. He hated it at first. Evelyn found him one morning standing at the edge of the construction zone, watching people work, his expression dark. What's wrong? This, he gestured to the activity. All of it. I didn't build this place to be a settlement. I built it to be isolated. Things change. I don't want them to change. His voice was tight. Every person here is another liability. Another person Cross can use against us. Another mouth to feed when winter gets bad. Or another set of hands to help build defenses. Another person to stand watch. Another reason to fight. Evelyn moved to stand beside him. You're afraid. Of course I'm afraid. I've spent 6 years controlling every variable, and now... He stopped. Now I can't control anything. You never could. You just convinced yourself otherwise. Rowan looked at her sharply. The fortress burned, Evelyn continued. Cross attacked. Daniel almost died. And we survived anyway. Not because you controlled everything, but because we adapted. She touched his arm. These people? They're not liabilities. They're proof that what you built matters. I didn't build it for them. No, you built it for yourself, to punish yourself, to hide. Her voice softened. But maybe it's time to let it be something else. Rowan stared at the valley, at children playing near the springs, at men building walls, at women organizing supplies. I don't know how to lead people, he said quietly. Then learn. The same way you learned everything else. Evelyn squeezed his arm. You're not alone in this anymore. The words settled over him like weight and relief all at once. Then a shout echoed from the southern ridge. Daniel came running, his face pale. Rowan, someone's coming. They armed themselves out of habit now. Rifles loaded, revolvers checked, knives within reach. But the figure that appeared at the valley entrance wasn't Cross or his men. It was a boy. 12, maybe 13. Bone thin, clothes torn, bleeding from a cut across his face. He collapsed before he reached them. Rowan got there first, checking for weapons, finding none. The kid was barely conscious, mumbling something incoherent. Get him inside, Evelyn said. Clara, we need water and bandages. They carried the boy to the medical shelter, a lean-to structure they'd built for injuries. Clara cleaned his wounds while Margaret tried to get him to drink. It took an hour before he could speak clearly. His name was Thomas. He'd been a runner for Cross, carrying messages between Black Hollow and the mercenary camps, but 3 days ago he'd overheard something that made him run. Cross is planning another attack, Thomas whispered, his voice hoarse. But not like before. He's bringing an army, 50 men, maybe more. Rowan's jaw tightened. When? 2 weeks. He's waiting for more supplies to arrive from the east. Dynamite, artillery. The boy's voice cracked. He's going to level the entire valley. Kill everyone. He doesn't care anymore about taking it intact. Silence fell over the shelter. Margaret's face went white. We have children here. I know, Rowan said. We can't fight 50 men. I know that too. Then what do we do? Daniel's voice shook. We can't evacuate. There's nowhere to go. Black Hollow won't take us. The other settlements are too far. Rowan stood, his mind already racing through scenarios. We don't evacuate. We prepare. For what? Samuel's voice was harsh. A massacre? For war. Rowan looked at each of them. Cross thinks he's facing a hermit and some refugees. He doesn't know what we've built, what we're capable of. His eyes hardened. So we show him. The preparations consumed the next 2 weeks. Rowan moved through the valley like a machine, his engineering mind turning every natural feature into a potential weapon. He identified choke points in the approach trails, weak spots in the rock faces that could be triggered to create avalanches, natural tunnels that could be collapsed to cut off retreat. He taught the able-bodied how to shoot, how to move in the mountains, how to use terrain as an ally. But it was Evelyn who transformed frightened refugees into something resembling fighters. She organized watch schedules, supply chains, evacuation routes for the children and elderly. She turned Margaret's teaching skills into strategy sessions, Henrik's kitchen into a logistics center, Samuel's carpentry into weapon construction. She became the backbone that held them together when fear threatened to break them apart. One night, 10 days into preparation, she found Rowan alone in the ruins of the old workshop. He was holding something, a photograph, creased and faded. Who is that? Evelyn asked. My brother, Thomas. Rowan's voice was hollow. He was 23 when he died, engaged to be married, had a job offer from a firm in Boston, his whole life ahead of him. I'm sorry. He believed in me, thought I was going to change the world with my designs. Rowan's hands tightened on the photograph. And I got him killed instead. Evelyn sat beside him. You didn't get him killed. Gerald Whitmore did. I designed the building to be safe, and it would have been if Whitmore hadn't cut corners. She touched his hand. You can't keep carrying this. Then what do I carry? The memory of who he was, what he believed in, what he'd want you to do now. Evelyn met his eyes. Do you think your brother would want you to spend the rest of your life punishing yourself? Or would he want you to use everything you learned to protect people who need protecting? Rowan looked at the photograph for a long moment, then he carefully folded it and put it in his pocket. He'd want me to fight, he said quietly. Then that's what we do. The night before Cross's attack, Rowan called everyone together. 31 people gathered in the clearing near the springs. Men, women, children, old and young. Faces marked by hardship and hope in equal measure. Rowan stood in front of them, and for the first time in 6 years, he spoke not as a hermit, but as the engineer he used to be. Tomorrow, men are coming to destroy what we've built here. They want the land, the resources. They don't care about your lives or your futures. His voice carried across the valley. 6 months ago, I would have faced them alone. I would have fought and probably died trying to protect this place by myself. He looked at Evelyn, at Daniel, at Margaret and Samuel and all the others, but I'm not alone anymore. None of us are. Rowan's expression hardened. So tomorrow, we don't fight as individuals. We fight as a community, and we show Gideon Cross what happens when you threaten people who have nothing left to lose and everything to protect. A murmur ran through the crowd. Fear, yes, but also something else. Determination. Those of you who can fight, you know your positions. Those who can't, you know the evacuation routes. Rowan's voice steadied. We've prepared for this. We've trained. We've turned this valley into something Cross won't expect. And when he comes tomorrow, we'll be ready, Daniel finished. Rowan nodded. Get some rest. It's going to be a long day. The crowd dispersed slowly, returning to shelters and preparations. Evelyn stayed behind. You're good at that, she said. At what? Leading, inspiring, being the person they need you to be. She moved closer. Your brother would be proud. Rowan's throat tightened. I hope so. I know so. Evelyn took his hand. And for what it's worth, I'm proud of you too. He pulled her close, holding her like she was the only solid thing in a shifting world. If this goes wrong tomorrow, it won't. Evelyn, no. She pulled back to look at him. We don't talk like that. We don't plan for failure. We fight and we win and we build something better. That's how this ends. Rowan searched her face. When did you become so certain? When I stopped running and started fighting. She smiled. You taught me that. I'm still not sure I deserve you. You don't, but you're stuck with me anyway. For the first time in days, Rowan laughed. Then the night settled over them, and they held each other in the darkness, knowing tomorrow would bring blood and fire and choices no one should have to make, but also knowing they'd face it together. The attack came at dawn, just like before. But this time, Rowan was ready. Cross's men entered the valley in force, 47 of them, armed with rifles, dynamite, and the kind of confidence that comes from overwhelming numbers. They found an empty valley, no people, no defenders, just silence and steam rising from the springs. Gideon Cross stood at the valley entrance, his face twisted with suspicion. Where are they? He demanded. One of his lieutenants shook his head. Maybe they ran. Or maybe it's a trap, another said. Cross pulled out a pair of field glasses, scanning the ridges. Nothing. Just snow and rock and the blackened skeleton of the old fortress. Spread out, he ordered. Search every structure, every cave. I want them found. The men moved forward in formation, weapons ready. They made it 50 feet before the first trap triggered. A support beam collapsed, sending half a ton of rock cascading down the trail. 3 men disappeared under the avalanche. The rest scattered, shouting. Hold position, Cross screamed. But it was too late. From concealed positions in the rocks above, Rowan's people opened fire. Not wildly, not randomly. With precision that came from 2 weeks of training and the kind of desperation that makes amateurs deadly. Men dropped. Others dove for cover. The valley erupted into chaos. Cross's forces returned fire, but they were shooting at shadows. Rowan had positioned his defenders in spots with natural cover and clear sightlines. Every shot his people took came from elevation, from concealment, from angles Cross's men couldn't counter. Fall back to the entrance, Cross roared. But when his men tried to retreat, they found the path blocked. Daniel had triggered the secondary collapse. Tons of rock sealed the main entrance, trapping Cross's forces inside the valley. No way out, only forward. Cross realized the truth with dawning horror. They weren't hunting the defenders, they were prey. The battle turned into a nightmare. Cross's men tried to advance through the valley, but every trail led to another trap. Tunnels that collapsed, ice bridges that shattered, false paths that ended in sheer drops. Rowan had spent 6 years learning every inch of this terrain, and he'd turned that knowledge into a killing field. But the mercenaries were professionals. They adapted quickly, using grenades to clear obstacles, suppressing fire to pin down defenders. And they had numbers. For every man they lost, they pushed deeper into the valley, closer to the shelters where the non-combatants were hiding. Rowan saw it happening from his position on the eastern ridge. They're breaking through the western approach, he said to Evelyn, who was reloading rifles beside him. Can we stop them? Not from here. Rowan's jaw tightened. I need to get down there. That's suicide. It's necessary. He handed her his rifle. Keep firing. Make them think we're still up here. An explosion shattered the morning. They both turned. The medical shelter, where the wounded and children were sheltered, was on fire. Someone had thrown dynamite. Evelyn's face went white. Margaret and the children are in there. Rowan was already running. He descended the ridge in controlled slides, using techniques he'd developed over 6 years of mountain survival. 40 seconds to reach the valley floor, 20 more to reach the burning shelter. The entrance was blocked by debris. Inside, children were screaming. Rowan didn't think. He just moved. He tore at the debris with his bare hands, ignoring the flames licking at his arms. Wood splintered. Stone shifted. His injured shoulder screamed in protest, but he didn't stop. A gap opened. Margaret appeared carrying a child, her face blackened with smoke. There are 3 more inside. Rowan pushed past her into the inferno. The heat was crushing. Smoke filled his lungs. But he could hear them, small voices crying in the darkness. He found the first child huddled in a corner, frozen with fear, grabbed her, pushed her toward the entrance. Go! She ran. The second child was unconscious. Rowan scooped him up, carried him out, handed him to waiting hands. One more. The shelter groaned. The support beams were failing. Rowan plunged back inside. He found the last child trapped under a fallen beam, a boy, maybe 6 years old, crying for his mother. Rowan grabbed the beam, tried to lift it. It wouldn't move. The shelter shuddered. The ceiling was about to collapse. Then someone was beside him. Daniel. Together they lifted the beam. The boy crawled free. Rowan shoved him toward the exit, then turned to follow. The ceiling came down. Rowan felt the impact, the weight crushing him into darkness. Then nothing. He woke to Evelyn's voice. Stay with me. Don't you dare. Pain. Everywhere. His chest felt crushed. Couldn't breathe. Rowan. Evelyn's face swam into view, tears streaming down her cheeks. You're alive. Stay alive. He tried to speak. Couldn't. Blood in his mouth. Around him, the battle still raged. Gunfire. Explosions. Screaming. But all he could see was Evelyn's face. I'm not letting you die, she said fiercely. You hear me? You don't get to be a hero and leave me behind. You promised we'd do this together. Rowan managed a sound that might have been a laugh or a cough. Then Daniel was there too, and Henrik, and they were lifting him, carrying him away from the burning shelter. The world blurred. When it came back into focus, Rowan was lying in a cave, Clara tending to his wounds with supplies she shouldn't have had. How? His voice was broken. How bad? 3 broken ribs, punctured lung, concussion. Clara didn't sugarcoat it. You should be dead. The children? Alive. Because of you. She pressed a cloth to his chest and pain exploded through him. Now shut up and let me work. Evelyn appeared beside him, her face drawn and pale. The battle? Still going. She took his hand. But we're holding them. Barely. Cross? Alive. Angry. She squeezed his hand. He's pushing hard toward the eastern shelters. Daniel's leading the defense there, but an explosion echoed from outside. Closer than before. Evelyn's face went tight. I need to go. No. Rowan tried to sit up, gasped as pain tore through his chest. Someone has to lead them, and you can't. She leaned down, kissed him hard. So I will. Evelyn. But she was already gone. Rowan lay in the cave, broken and useless, listening to the battle rage outside. And for the first time in his life, he understood what it meant to be truly helpless. Evelyn ran toward the sound of gunfire, her heart hammering, the revolver heavy in her hand. She'd never led anything before, never commanded people, never been responsible for lives beyond her own. But she'd watched Rowan do it, watched him calculate, strategize, think 3 steps ahead. And she'd learned. She found Daniel and 6 others pinned down behind a rock formation, Cross's men advancing with organized precision. Status, she shouted. We're out of ammunition, Daniel yelled back, and they're flanking us on the north side. Evelyn's mind raced. Think, what would Rowan do? She looked at the terrain. The hot springs 20 feet to the left, the unstable ledge above the advancing men, the wind direction, a plan formed. Insane, desperate, perfect. Daniel, can you hit that ledge? She pointed. He looked, understanding dawning in his eyes. If I had bullets. Henrik, give Daniel your rifle. Henrik tossed it. Daniel caught it, took aim. On my signal, Evelyn said. She ran toward the springs drawing fire, bullets kicking up snow around her feet. The mercenaries saw her, shifted their aim. Exactly what she needed. Now! She screamed. Daniel fired. The bullet struck the unstable ledge. Rock cracked. The entire face came loose. Tons of stone cascaded down on the advancing men. Screams cut off abruptly. The flank collapsed. Evelyn dove behind cover as debris rained down. When the dust cleared, Cross's advance had stalled. The defenders cheered. But Evelyn knew it wasn't over. She looked toward the valley entrance, where Gideon Cross stood with his remaining men, maybe 20 of them now. Battered, but not broken. Their eyes met across the battlefield. Cross raised his rifle. Evelyn raised hers. And somewhere in the back of her mind, she heard Rowan's voice. Sometimes the only way to win is to be willing to lose everything. She stepped out from cover. Cross! Oh, her voice carried across the valley. This ends now! He lowered his rifle slightly, surprised. You? Me. Evelyn walked forward, exposed, her weapon at her side. You came here for resources, for land, for profit, and all you found is death. I found resistance. There's a difference. Then take a good look around. Evelyn gestured to the valley. The burning shelters, the collapsed trails, the bodies. This is what your profit cost. Was it worth it? Cross's face hardened. It will be when I take everything you've built. You can't take what doesn't belong to anyone. Evelyn's voice was steady. This valley isn't property. It's not a commodity, it's a home. For people who had nowhere else to go, and will die before we let you turn it into another thing corrupt men exploit. Noble speech doesn't change the math. Cross raised his rifle again. I still have 20 men. You have what? A dozen defenders? Half of them injured? I have something better. Evelyn smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. I have nothing left to lose. She pulled the trigger, not at Cross. At the support structure behind him, the one Rowan had weakened during the first battle, the one that held back a quarter-mile of unstable slope. The shot was perfect. The structure collapsed. The mountain came down. Cross's men had seconds to realize what was happening before the avalanche swallowed them whole. Snow and rock and ice roared down the slope like a living thing, consuming everything in its path. Evelyn dove for cover, felt the ground shake, heard the world end in thunder. When it stopped, silence fell over the valley, broken only by the sound of wind and settling snow. Evelyn stood slowly, her ears ringing. The valley entrance was gone, buried under 50 feet of debris, and somewhere beneath it, Gideon Cross and the men who'd followed him to their deaths. Daniel appeared beside her, his face white with shock. You killed them all. I ended it. Evelyn's voice was hollow. That's different. Is it? She looked at him. Do you think they would have stopped? Do you think Cross would have walked away? Daniel stared at the avalanche, then back at her. No. Then I did what had to be done. Evelyn turned toward the cave where Rowan was sheltering. Now let's make sure everyone survives what comes next. The aftermath was brutal. 9 defenders dead, 14 wounded. The valley's defenses were shattered, supplies depleted, structures burned. But they'd survived. Rowan recovered slowly, his ribs healing, his lung reinflating. He couldn't work for weeks, could barely walk without pain tearing through his chest. It drove him insane. But Evelyn wouldn't let him push himself. Neither would Daniel, or Margaret, or any of the others. They'd learned from him, and now they used that knowledge to rebuild without him. It was the hardest thing Rowan had ever endured, watching others do the work he'd always controlled. But it was also the most important, because he finally understood he wasn't the valley. He'd started it, designed it, built the foundation. But it had grown beyond him, into something that could survive even if he couldn't. 6 weeks after the battle, Rowan stood at the edge of the valley, looking at what they'd accomplished. New shelters, stronger than before. Defensive positions that could withstand another attack. A community that had learned to work together, to fight together, to survive together. Evelyn found him there, as she always did. How are you feeling? Like I got crushed by a building. He smiled slightly. But alive. Good. She leaned against him carefully, mindful of his healing ribs. Because we're going to need you. For what? For what comes next? Evelyn gestured to the valley. We can't stay isolated forever. Word's going to spread about what happened here, about the battle, about the avalanche. People will come looking, some out of curiosity, some out of greed. And some out of need, Rowan finished. Yes. He was quiet for a long moment. I built this place to hide, he said finally, to punish myself, to avoid the world. I know. But maybe, he stopped, started again. Maybe it's time to stop hiding, to use what we've learned here to help others, not just the people in this valley, but everyone who needs it. Evelyn looked at him. What are you saying? I'm saying we share the knowledge, the designs, the systems. Rowan's voice strengthened. We turn this valley into a place where people can learn how to survive, how to build communities that don't depend on corrupt investors or greedy land barons, how to make homes in places everyone else has abandoned. That's dangerous. It makes you visible. I'm already visible. Cross knew who I was. Others will figure it out eventually. Rowan met her eyes. But maybe that's okay. Maybe it's time to stop being Rowan the Hermit and start being Ronan the Engineer? He flinched at the name, then slowly nodded. Not the man I was, but not the ghost I became either. He took Evelyn's hand. Someone new. Someone who uses what he learned from failure to build something better. Evelyn squeezed his hand. Then that's what we do. Together? Always. They stood together, looking at the valley, scarred, wounded, but alive. And somewhere in the ruins of the old fortress, in the ashes of the past, something new was already growing. Spring came late to the Iron Fang range that year, arriving not with warmth, but with mud and the kind of cold rain that soaked through everything. Rowan stood in what used to be the workshop, watching water drip through gaps in the temporary roof they'd built. His ribs still ached when he breathed too deep, a permanent reminder of the shelter that had nearly killed him. But he was alive. They were all alive. That counted for something. "You're brooding again," Evelyn said from the doorway. "I'm thinking. Same thing with you." She crossed to stand beside him, her boots squelching in the mud. "What's the verdict?" Rowan gestured to the half-built structures scattered across the valley. "We've got maybe 3 months before winter comes back. We need to rebuild the heating system, finish the shelters, stockpile enough supplies for 40 people instead of 1. And we're already behind schedule. So we work faster. That's not how engineering works. You rush, you make mistakes. Mistakes get people killed. Then we work smarter." Evelyn pulled a folded paper from her coat. "Margaret and I drew up a timeline. We prioritize the heating system first, shelters second, everything else as we have resources. Henrik thinks we can stretch the food supplies through August if we ration carefully. Samuel's teaching 6 people carpentry. We're training them to help build." Rowan took the paper, studied it. The timeline was detailed, realistic, accounting for setbacks and weather delays. It was good work. He looked at Evelyn. "When did you become an engineer?" "When I married one and paid attention." She smiled. "You've been teaching me for months. I just started applying it." Something shifted in Rowan's chest. Not pain this time, something warmer. "I spent 6 years believing I had to do everything alone," he said quietly. "That depending on others meant weakness, failure. And now? Now I think I was an idiot." Evelyn laughed, the sound bright against the drumming rain. "Welcome to the rest of your life." They worked through spring and into summer, and the valley transformed in ways that terrified and inspired Rowan in equal measure. The heating system came together piece by piece, rebuilt with improvements he'd been sketching for years but never implemented. Daniel had a knack for metalwork that surprised everyone, especially himself. Together, they forged pipes and valves that would distribute heat more efficiently than the original design. Margaret turned the education of children into something larger. She taught reading and writing, yes, but also basic engineering principles, water management, agriculture adapted for harsh climates. The kids absorbed it like water into dry ground, asking questions that made Rowan rethink assumptions he'd held for years. One afternoon, a girl named Sarah, maybe 9 years old, pointed to his blueprint for the greenhouse and asked, "Why do you use straight supports here? Wooden arches distribute weight better?" Rowan stared at the design, then at her. "You're right," he said. Sarah beamed, and Rowan realized something that should have been obvious years ago. Intelligence wasn't rare. Opportunity was. Henrik and Clara's kitchen became the heart of the community. Not just because they fed people, but because they created a space where everyone gathered, where problems were discussed and solutions found, where Daniel could joke with Samuel, where Margaret could organize lessons, where exhausted workers could rest and feel human again. Evelyn moved through it all like the spine of a creature learning to walk. She mediated disputes, allocated resources, made decisions Rowan used to agonize over, and she did it with a confidence that came from surviving things that should have destroyed her. One evening, Rowan found her sitting by the springs, her feet in the water, staring at nothing. "You all right?" She looked up, smiled tiredly. "Just thinking." "About?" "About how strange it is. 6 months ago, I was running from debt collectors, terrified, alone. And now, she gestured to the valley, now I'm helping build a community in the middle of nowhere, making decisions that affect dozens of lives, leading people. You're good at it. I'm terrified I'll mess it up. Her voice dropped. What if I make the wrong call? What if someone gets hurt because I didn't see something coming? Rowan sat beside her. Then you'll have joined every leader who ever existed. Perfection isn't the goal, Evelyn. Survival is. And you've kept us alive. We've kept us alive. Yes, but you're the reason we function as a we instead of a bunch of individuals hiding in the same place. He took her hand. I built systems. You built community. That's harder and more important. Evelyn's eyes glistened. I never wanted this, never imagined. None of us did. But here we are anyway. Rowan squeezed her hand. And I wouldn't want to be here with anyone else. She leaned against him, and they sat in silence, listening to the valley come alive around them. But peace, as always, was temporary. The first sign of trouble came in late July, when a trader from Black Hollow arrived with supplies and news that made Rowan's blood run cold. The trader's name was Marcus, a grizzled man who'd been running goods through the frontier for 20 years. He knew everyone, heard everything, and survived by being useful to all sides. He found Rowan in the new workshop, working on a water filtration prototype. Got a problem, Marcus said without preamble. Rowan set down his tools. What kind? The kind where Cross's business partners in the East are asking questions about why their investment disappeared. They sent investigators to Black Hollow last week, started poking around, asking about the valley, about you, about what happened during the battle. What did people tell them? Marcus shrugged. Most folks don't know anything, but some remember the kid, Thomas, the runner. He's been talking, not on purpose, just kids talk. And the investigators are putting pieces together. Rowan's jaw tightened. How long before they come here? Week, maybe 2. They're gathering information, building a case. Marcus pulled out a flask, took a drink. They've got lawyers, money, and the kind of connections that make frontier marshals look the other way. If they decide you murdered their people and stole this land, they'll bring enough firepower to level the whole valley. We survived Cross. Cross was a land grabber with mercenaries. These men are industrialists with private armies. Marcus met Rowan's eyes. You can't fight this with avalanches and clever engineering. This is legal warfare, and you're going to lose. Rowan stood silent for a long moment. Then, unless I don't fight at all. What? They want answers about what happened to Cross and his men. Fine, I'll give them answers. Rowan's mind was already working through scenarios. But not here, in Black Hollow, on neutral ground, with witnesses. Marcus frowned. That's suicide. The moment they identify you as Ronan Hale, the engineer wanted for murder. Then I don't hide it. I admit it. All of it. Rowan's voice was steady. The factory collapse, Gerald Whitmore, the 6 years in hiding, everything. You'll hang, maybe. Or maybe the truth is worth something. Marcus stared at him like he'd lost his mind. Maybe he had. Evelyn thought so when he told her the plan. Absolutely not, she said, her voice sharp with fear and fury. You're not walking into Black Hollow and confessing to murder. I won't let you. It's not your choice. The hell it isn't. We're married. We're partners. You don't get to martyr yourself without discussing it first. They were in their shelter, a small room they shared, one of the few private spaces in the valley. Rain hammered the roof. Thunder rumbled in the distance. Rowan sat on the bed, his hands clasped between his knees. If I don't do this, they'll come here. And when they do, they won't negotiate. They won't listen. They'll just destroy everything we've built and everyone in it. Then we fight them like we fought Cross. We barely survived Cross, and that was with the element of surprise and defensive terrain. Rowan looked at her. These men will come prepared for that. They'll bring siege equipment, professional soldiers, maybe even artillery. We can't win that fight. So you're going to surrender? I'm going to tell the truth and hope it matters. Evelyn's hands clenched. The truth got your brother killed. The truth got 47 workers buried. The truth is what made you run in the first place. No. Silence is what got people killed. Complicity. Looking away when I knew something was wrong because it was easier than fighting. Rowan stood, crossed to where she stood. I spent 6 years hiding from that mistake. I'm not hiding anymore. Even if it means dying? Even then. His voice softened. But I'm not planning to die. I'm planning to fight, just differently than before. Evelyn stared at him, tears streaming down her face. I can't lose you. Not after everything. You won't. Rowan pulled her close. But if I do this wrong, if I let fear keep me silent, then we'll lose everything anyway. At least this way there's a chance. She held him like she could keep him there through will alone. Then, quietly, I'm coming with you. No. Yes. She pulled back, her expression fierce. You don't get to do this alone. If you're going to confess, if you're going to face whatever comes, then I'm standing beside you. That's not negotiable. Rowan started to argue, then stopped, because he saw it in her eyes. The same determination that had carried her across 4 states running from debt. The same strength that had helped her survive the frontier, the attack, the battle. She wasn't asking permission. She was stating fact. All right, he said, together. They left for Black Hollow 3 days later. Daniel wanted to come too, but Rowan refused. The valley needs someone who knows how things work. If we don't come back, you keep building, you keep protecting these people. Understand? Daniel's face was tight with emotion. You're coming back. Probably, but if we don't... You're coming back, Daniel repeated, his voice breaking. You have to. Rowan gripped the kid's shoulder. You're stronger than you think. Smarter than I was at your age. If something happens, you'll be fine. I don't want to be fine. I want... Daniel stopped, unable to finish. Rowan pulled him into a brief, hard embrace. I know. Margaret approached as they prepared to leave, her face serious. We'll keep things running. Don't worry about us. I always worry, Rowan said. Then worry efficiently. She smiled slightly. And come back with a solution. We've gotten used to having you around. Henrik and Clara gave them supplies. Samuel had carved Rowan a walking stick, functional and beautiful, a piece of craftsmanship that spoke volumes without words. One by one, the others came to say goodbye. Quiet words, clasped hands, the weight of hope and fear mixed together. Then Rowan and Evelyn walked out of the valley, down trails they'd defended with blood, toward a town that had never seen them as anything but strange and dangerous. The journey took 2 days. They camped in a cave the first night, and Rowan lay awake listening to rain and Evelyn's breathing. What are you thinking? She asked quietly. That this might be the stupidest thing I've ever done. It's not. How do you know? Because the stupidest thing you ever did was hide for 6 years pretending you didn't matter. She rolled to face him. This? This is the first smart thing you've done since your brother died. I'm walking into a town that wants me arrested to confess to murder, hoping that somehow the truth will, set me free? That's not smart. That's insane. It's brave. There's a difference. Rowan was quiet for a long time. Then, I'm terrified. Good. That means you're thinking clearly. Evelyn took his hand. But you're not alone. Whatever happens tomorrow, we face it together. And that's worth more than any amount of hiding. He squeezed her hand, holding on to her like an anchor in a storm, and tried to believe she was right. Black Hollow looked the same as it had 6 months ago. Same crooked buildings, same muddy street, same hostile eyes watching strangers with suspicion. But the people gathering in the town's only meeting hall, a converted warehouse that smelled like sawdust and old tobacco, were different. 3 men in expensive suits sat at a table on the raised platform, lawyers by the look of them. Behind them, 6 armed guards stood at attention. The townspeople filled the benches. Curious, angry, afraid, and in the front row, Marcus the traitor, who'd agreed to serve as a neutral witness. Rowan and Evelyn entered together, and a murmur ran through the crowd. One of the suited men stood, 50s, silver hair, eyes like calculating machines. Rowan Hale? Yes. I'm Richard Winters. I represent the Eastern Industrial Partnership, which invested significant capital in Gideon Cross's land acquisition ventures. We have questions about the disappearance of Mr. Cross and 46 men under his employ. I'll answer them. Winters smiled. It wasn't friendly. Where is Gideon Cross? Dead. Buried under an avalanche I triggered to stop him from massacring the people in my valley. Gasps from the crowd. The guards' hands moved toward weapons. Winters raised a hand. You admit to killing him? I admit to defending my home from armed mercenaries who attacked without provocation. Rowan's voice was steady. Cross came to my valley twice. The first time he demanded I sell land I'd lived on for 6 years. The second time he brought 50 men armed with rifles and dynamite. He burned my home, killed 9 people, and tried to murder everyone else. So yes, I stopped him. And I'd do it again. By what right? The land isn't legally yours. No deed, no claim. Just squatter's occupation. By the right of survival. By the right of people to defend themselves against violence. By the right— Rowan stepped forward. By the right of human beings to exist without being commodities for rich men to exploit. The room went silent. Winter's expression hardened. Philosophical arguments don't change the law, Mr. Hale. Or should I call you Ronan Hale? The engineer wanted for murder in Philadelphia. More gasps. Evelyn's hand tightened on Rowan's arm. Yes, Rowan said. That's who I am. So you admit to 2 murders now, Gerald Whitmore and Gideon Cross. I admit to killing 2 men who valued profit over human life. Gerald Whitmore covered up a factory collapse that killed 47 people, including my brother. He laughed about it, so I pushed him down a flight of stairs. Rowan's voice didn't waver. And Gideon Cross came to my valley to slaughter refugees because they were in the way of his investment. So I buried him under a mountain. Both men got what they deserved. That's not justice. That's vigilante murder. You're right. It's not justice. Justice would have been Gerald Whitmore in prison for manslaughter. Justice would have been Gideon Cross arrested for attempted murder. But we don't live in a world where justice applies to rich men, do we, Mr. Winters? Winters' jaw tightened. You're confessing to capital crimes. I'm confessing to survival. To protecting people the law doesn't care about. To building something good in a place no one else wanted. Rowan looked at the crowd. I came here because I'm tired of hiding. Tired of pretending that silence is safety. So here's the truth, all of it. And he told them. Every detail. The factory collapse, the cover-up, his brother's death, the confrontation with Whitmore. 6 years in the mountains building a sanctuary, the refugees who'd found shelter there, Cross's attacks, the battle, the avalanche, all of it. When he finished, the room was silent. Then a voice from the crowd. My cousin worked in the Whitmore mill. He was one of the 47. Another voice. Cross tried to buy my land for half what it was worth. When I refused, he burned my barn. More voices. Stories of corruption, of violence, of men like Whitmore and Cross destroying lives for profit. Winters stood, his face red. This is not a trial. These testimonials are irrelevant. Are they? Rowan's voice cut through the noise. Because it seems like you came here to prosecute me for killing men everyone in this room knows were criminals. You're not seeking justice. You're protecting your investment. We're protecting the rule of law. No. You're protecting a system that lets rich men commit murder with paperwork while punishing poor men who defend themselves with their hands. Rowan stepped closer to the platform. So here's my offer. Take me. Arrest me. Put me on trial in Philadelphia. But leave the valley alone. Leave the people there alone. They've done nothing wrong except survive in a place you never cared about until Cross told you it might be profitable. Winter's eyes narrowed. And if we refuse, then you'll have to explain to a judge why your company funded mercenary attacks on civilians, why you're pursuing a man for defending refugees from armed assault, why you're more interested in punishing a killer than the system that created him. Rowan pulled out a folded document. I've written everything down. Names, dates, details about Whitmore's cover-up, Cross's attacks, your company's involvement. If anything happens to me or the people in that valley, this document goes to every newspaper between here and Boston. You're blackmailing us? I'm negotiating, same as you would. Rowan's voice was ice. So what's it going to be? Justice that makes you look complicit in murder, or a quiet resolution that lets everyone walk away? The silence that followed was crushing. Winters looked at his colleagues, whispered conversations, calculations happening behind expensive suits and legal degrees. Then he turned back to Rowan. The Eastern Industrial Partnership will not pursue criminal charges. In exchange, you will sign a document relinquishing any future claim to the land in the Iron Fang range. The valley becomes federal territory, unowned and unclaimable. Agreed. And you will cease using the name Ronan Hale. The warrant for your arrest remains active, but we will not pursue it if you remain Rowan Hale, frontier hermit, and nothing more. Rowan considered this. And the people in the valley are free to stay or go as they please. We have no interest in refugees. Then we have an agreement. Papers were drawn up, signatures exchanged, legal language that boiled down to, you leave us alone, we leave you alone, and everyone pretends justice was served. It was a compromise, a deal made in shadows. But it was survival. When it was over, Rowan and Evelyn walked out of the meeting hall into afternoon sunlight. The crowd followed, not threatening, but curious. An old woman approached. You really killed Whitmore? Yes. Good. He had it coming. She pressed a worn coin into his hand. For your trouble. Others followed. Not everyone. But enough. Small offerings, coins, food, a battered compass, tokens from people who understood that justice sometimes came from the barrel of a gun instead of the bang of a gavel. Rowan stood on the muddy street of Black Hollow, accepting gifts from strangers, and realized something profound. He wasn't a ghost anymore. He wasn't Ronan Hale, the fallen engineer. He wasn't Rowan Hale, the mountain hermit. He was just a man who'd made terrible mistakes and was trying, however imperfectly, to build something better. And that was enough. They returned to the valley 3 days later to find it thriving. Daniel had organized a work rotation that kept construction moving. Margaret had started an evening school teaching adults to read. Henrik and Clara had expanded the kitchen, turning it into a proper dining hall. The community hadn't just survived, it had grown. Rowan stood at the valley entrance, looking at what they'd built, and felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in 6 years. Pride. Not the arrogant pride that had driven him to chase fame and fortune in Philadelphia, but the quiet pride that came from building something real, something that helped people, something that might outlast him. Evelyn slipped her hand into his. What are you thinking? That I spent 6 years trying to build a perfect sanctuary, isolated, controlled, safe. And I built a prison instead. He looked at her. This, what we have now, it's messy, complicated, unpredictable, and it's more real than anything I created alone. So what do we do now? Rowan was quiet for a moment. Then, we keep building, but not just for us. We teach others, share the knowledge, create a place where people can learn to survive in harsh conditions, where refugees and outcasts can find shelter and purpose, where broken people can become whole again, Evelyn finished. Yes, she smiled. Then that's what we do. The years that followed weren't easy. Winter came hard, testing everything they'd built. 2 people died from illness despite their best efforts. Supplies ran low, conflicts erupted over resources and responsibilities. But they survived. And slowly, word spread. Not through official channels, not through newspapers or government proclamations, but through whispers in frontier towns, through traders like Marcus, who carried stories along with goods, through refugees who found the valley and sent word to others like them. By the 2nd year, they had 50 residents. By the 3rd, 70. People came from mining camps destroyed by greed, from factory towns where workers were expendable, from places where the law protected the powerful and abandoned everyone else. They came broken and desperate, and Rowan taught them to build, not just structures, but lives. He designed heating systems they could replicate in other settlements, water filtration methods simple enough for non-engineers to maintain, agricultural techniques for harsh climates, structural supports that could withstand the frontier's brutality. And he taught them for free, asking nothing in return except that they teach others. Evelyn organized it all, created systems for resource allocation, dispute resolution, community governance. She turned a chaotic refuge into a functioning society built on principles of mutual support instead of exploitation. Daniel grew into a man, his skills surpassing even Rowan's in some areas. He became the valley's chief builder, designing structures that balanced Rowan's engineering precision with innovative approaches that pushed boundaries. And Margaret, Henrik, Clara, Samuel, All of them found roles that mattered, that helped people, that proved survival didn't have to mean isolation. 5 years after the battle with Cross, a young woman arrived at the valley entrance. She was thin, exhausted, carrying a child and running from debts she couldn't pay. Evelyn saw her and remembered herself 6 years ago, desperate, alone, terrified. "You're safe here," Evelyn said. "Come in." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "I have nothing to offer." "You don't need to offer anything. You just need to stay alive." Evelyn took her arm, gently guiding her inside. "We'll figure out the rest together." Rowan watched from a distance, seeing Evelyn transform someone else's despair into hope, the way she'd transformed his. That night, he found her sitting by the springs, the same spot where they'd sat years ago. "You saved her," he said. "We saved her. This place saved her." Evelyn looked at the valley, at the lights in the windows, at the smoke rising from chimneys, at the sound of voices and laughter. "The same way it saved us." Rowan sat beside her. "Do you ever regret it? Marrying a stranger, climbing into the mountains, everything that came after?" Evelyn was quiet for a moment. Then, "I regret that it took desperation to find this. I regret the people we lost. I regret that the world is broken enough that places like this are necessary." She took his hand. "But I don't regret choosing you. I don't regret building this. I don't regret any of it. Even the parts that almost killed us? Especially those, because those are the parts that proved we're stronger than we thought." She looked at him. "You spent 6 years punishing yourself for being human, for making mistakes, for not being perfect, and you built a fortress to protect yourself from ever failing again. But failure is just proof you're trying, and trying is all any of us can do." Rowan pulled her close, holding her in the darkness while the valley hummed with life around them. "I love you," he said. Simple words, true ones. "I know." Evelyn smiled against his shoulder. "I figured that out around the time you nearly died saving children from a burning building. That was stupidity, not love. With you, they're usually the same thing." He laughed, and the sound echoed across the springs, mixing with the voices of people who'd found home in the last place anyone thought to look. 10 years after Evelyn Mercer stepped off a dying train into Black Hollow, the valley had become something impossible. Not just a refuge, not just a community, a movement. Dozens of settlements across the frontier had adopted Rowan's designs, heating systems that saved lives through brutal winters, water filtration that prevented disease, agricultural techniques that turned barren land productive. The knowledge spread like wildfire, passed from engineer to builder to farmer to teacher. No patents, no profits, just information shared freely because it was needed. Rowan's name, both of them, became legend in frontier towns. The engineer who'd vanished after killing a corrupt businessman, the hermit who'd built a kingdom in the mountains, the man who'd fought an army and won. People embellished the stories, adding details that weren't true. But the core remained. A broken man had found redemption not through isolation, but through community. And Evelyn became a legend too. The woman who'd married a ghost and taught him to live again, who'd organized refugees into a society, who'd stood in Black Hollow and fought with words instead of bullets. Neither of them felt like legends. They felt like survivors who'd gotten lucky. On the 10th anniversary of their arrival in the valley, the community threw a celebration. Food from Henrik and Clara's kitchen, music from instruments people had built themselves, children playing games Margaret had taught them, adults sharing stories about the journey that had brought them to this impossible place. Rowan stood at the edge of it all, watching. Daniel found him there, 27 now, married to a woman named Ruth who'd arrived 3 years ago. They had a daughter, named her Evelyn. "Not joining the party?" Daniel asked. "I am, just from here." Rowan gestured to the crowd. "I like seeing it all at once. Proof it's real." "It's real." Daniel was quiet for a moment. "You know what I remember most about when I first came here?" "What?" "How empty it was. Just you and the fortress and all that silence. It felt like a tomb." Daniel looked at the valley now. "This feels like life." "It is life. Messy and complicated and exhausting." "And worth it?" Rowan smiled. "Every second." Evelyn appeared, pulling Rowan toward the celebration. "Stop brooding and come dance." "I don't dance." "You do now." She dragged him into the crowd. And for a few hours, Rowan let himself forget about engineering and survival and the weight of responsibility. He just danced with his wife while the community they'd built celebrated around them. And somewhere in the back of his mind, he imagined his brother Thomas watching. Not with judgment, not with disappointment, but with the kind of pride that came from seeing someone learn from failure instead of being destroyed by it. The final test came 13 years after the battle with Cross. A federal surveyor arrived at the valley with documents claiming the land had been designated for railroad expansion. The government wanted to buy it, or take it through eminent domain if necessary. Rowan read the documents and felt old anger stirring. This was it. The thing he'd always feared, the system finding his sanctuary and deciding it was worth more destroyed than preserved. But he wasn't the same man who'd run from Philadelphia 13 years ago. And he wasn't alone. The community gathered to discuss the options. Evelyn led the meeting, her voice calm and authoritative. "We have 3 choices," she said. "Fight the government and probably lose. Accept their offer and relocate. Or negotiate for something better." "What's better than keeping our home?" someone asked. "Expanding it." Evelyn looked at Rowan. "Tell them." Rowan stood, his mind already working through the possibilities. "The railroad doesn't want the valley. They want a route through the mountains. If we can offer them an alternative path, one that's actually better for their purposes, they might agree to leave the valley intact. Can we do that? If we survey the range and find a route with better grade, fewer obstacles, and lower construction costs? Yes. Rowan's voice strengthened. And if we offer to help design the route, share engineering knowledge that saves them time and money, they'd be fools to refuse. Daniel spoke up. So we don't fight them. We make ourselves useful. Exactly. It took 6 months. 6 months of surveying, calculating, designing. 6 months of negotiating with federal officials who couldn't decide if Rowan was an asset or a liability. But eventually, a deal was struck. The railroad would use Rowan's alternative route. In exchange, the valley would be designated a federal land grant, protected territory where the community could remain permanently. And Rowan would consult on mountain engineering for the railroad, his designs helping workers survive conditions that had killed hundreds in other projects. It wasn't perfect, but it was survival. And more than that, it was proof that knowledge, shared freely, had value beyond profit. The railroad came through 2 years later, connecting frontier towns that had been isolated for decades. And Rowan's designs kept workers alive through construction. Better safety protocols, improved equipment, structural supports that prevented the kind of collapse that had killed his brother. He couldn't undo the past, but he could make sure it didn't repeat. 20 years after stepping off a dying train into Black Hollow, Evelyn stood at the valley entrance and watched the sun rise over the mountains. She was 46 now, gray threading through her hair, hands marked by years of work, but alive, whole, happy. Rowan found her there, as he always did. He moved slower now, his injured ribs from the battle a permanent ache, but he was still here. Still building, still trying. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "About how strange life is. How I came here expecting to die. And instead I found," she gestured to the valley, "all of this. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd refused? If you'd stayed in Black Hollow instead of marrying a strange mountain man? Every day." Evelyn took his hand. "And every day, I'm grateful I didn't. Even though it almost killed you? Multiple times? Especially because of that. Easy lives don't teach you what you're capable of. Comfortable lives don't show you who you really are." She looked at him. "I learned more about myself in 20 years with you than I would have in 100 years of safety. Is that good or bad? It's real. And real is all that matters." They stood together, watching the valley wake up. Children heading to school, adults starting work. The rhythm of a community that had learned to survive not through isolation, but through cooperation. "We did something good here," Rowan said quietly. "We did something human. That's better." Years passed. The valley grew. New people arrived. Others left to start communities elsewhere, taking the knowledge with them. Daniel took over as chief engineer when Rowan's hands got too shaky for precision work. Margaret trained a new generation of teachers. Henrik and Clara retired, passing the kitchen to younger hands. And Rowan and Evelyn grew old together, watching the thing they'd built outlive them. Not a fortress, not a sanctuary, but a home. On a cold morning in late autumn, 32 years after their first meeting, Evelyn found Rowan sitting by the springs, staring at the water.
"You all right?" she asked. "Just thinking about my brother, about how young he was when he died, all the things he never got to do." "You think about him a lot." "Every day." Rowan's voice was rough. "I wonder what he'd think of all this, if he'd be proud or disappointed." "He'd be proud. Anyone with eyes could see that." "How do you know?" "Because you took the worst thing that ever happened to you and turned it into something that helps people. That's not failure. That's alchemy."
Rowan looked at her. "When did you get so wise?" "When I married an engineer and learned to think in systems." She smiled. "You taught me that. I taught you engineering. You taught yourself wisdom." They sat in comfortable silence, watching steam rise from the springs. "Do you regret killing Whitmore?" Evelyn asked. Rowan was quiet for a long time, then, "I regret that it was necessary, but no. He destroyed lives for profit and laughed about it. He deserved what he got." "And Cross?" "Same answer. The world is better without men who treat people as obstacles to wealth."
"That's a dangerous philosophy."
"Maybe, but it's honest."
Rowan looked at the valley. "I spent 6 years trying to build a perfect place where violence and corruption couldn't touch us. But perfection isn't possible. All we can do is build something worth defending and hope we have the strength to protect it when necessary."
"We did." "Yes, we did." The sun climbed higher, burning off the morning mist, and in the valley below, life continued. Imperfect, complicated, beautiful, exactly as it should be. Rowan Hale died in his sleep on a spring morning, 73 years old, surrounded by the community he'd built. Evelyn held his hand as he went, her own hand marked by age and work, and a lifetime of choosing hard things over easy ones. The valley mourned, not with theatrics, but with the quiet grief of people who'd lost someone who mattered. They buried him in this place he'd chosen years before, a ridge overlooking the valley where he could see everything they'd built together. And on his grave marker, Evelyn had them carve not one name, but two. Rowan Hale, brilliant engineer, flawed man, Rowan Hale, builder of sanctuary, father of community, because he'd been both. And both mattered. Evelyn lived another 8 years, long enough to see the valley expand, to watch Daniel's children grow, to know that what they'd started would outlast them. On her last day, she sat by the springs one final time, watching the water and remembering. A desperate woman marrying a stranger, climbing into mountains that should have killed her, fighting battles she never imagined winning, building a life from nothing but stubbornness and hope. She thought about Rowan, about the man she'd found beneath the savage exterior, about everything they'd survived together. And she smiled, because in the end, they'd proven something important, that broken people could become whole, that mistakes didn't define you, that isolation was a prison, but community was freedom, that the greatest act of courage wasn't fighting alone, it was allowing yourself to need others, and that sometimes the most reckless decision you ever make turns out to be the best one. Evelyn Hale died peacefully, surrounded by people who loved her. In the valley, she'd helped transform from a hiding place into a home. And the story didn't end there, because the knowledge spread, the techniques refined, the communities multiplied. All across the frontier and settlements no one thought could survive, people built heating systems and water filtration and structures designed to withstand impossible conditions. They didn't know they were using designs created by a disgraced engineer hiding from murder charges. They just knew the systems worked. And that was enough. Years later, a young woman stepped off a train in a frontier town, running from debt and despair, with nowhere to go and nothing left to lose. Someone told her about a valley in the mountains, a place where refugees found shelter, where broken people learned to build. She didn't believe it at first, but she climbed anyway and found home in the last place she thought to look, the way countless others had before her, the way countless others would after. Because Rowan and Evelyn hadn't just built a valley. They'd built proof that survival was possible, that community mattered, that choosing to care about others, even when it cost you everything, was the only thing worth doing. And in a world that valued profit over people, isolation over connection, that proof was worth more than all the fortunes in Philadelphia. It was worth everything.